Chapter 466. Li Qitian never expected that Pang Xiao would dare to shout at him like this in public. He was the emperor, and the world was his. Pang Xiao was just an official, but he dared to speak like this in front of him. Did he want to rebel? Li Qitian only felt that his face was damaged. He immediately pointed at Pang Xiao and scolded angrily. Do you know who you were talking to? Do you know who you were accusing? Do you think I would send someone to kidnap your wife? Pang Xiao restrained himself and did not directly kill the person in front of him to vent his anger. Your Majesty. Pang Xiao cupped his hands in greeting. His muscles, which were drenched by rain and mud, moved smoothly. His wheat-colored skin was covered with scars of various sizes. These were the scars left by many years of war. They were enough to make the people present admire him. His voice was not as sharp as Li Qitian's. Instead, it was flat and straightforward. My humble wife accompanied me in the disaster area and suffered from hunger all day in such a harsh environment. She also had to worry about the suffering of the people. Although she was a woman, she had a benevolent heart that cared about the people. She wanted to do something for the people, so she never complained in front of me. When she saw that the people in the disaster area had no food or medicine, she took the initiative to sell her dowry in exchange for money to buy food for the people. She also transported the grain from the fields under her name to the porridge stall without collecting any money. It can be said that because of her help, I reduced a lot of the pressure on the rice relief. It also allowed many people to escape the fate of starvation. This is not me boasting about her contributions. Magistrate Gong, County Magistrate Li, and the people of the old capital and the Yang County all know what she did. She was sick, but she couldn't let go of the disaster area and refused to leave. It was me who forced her to return to the capital to recuperate. Her body was weak, unlike me, who was a rough man. My skin was thick and could withstand beatings. She was a delicate woman. How could she withstand the starvation and lack of medicine in the disaster area? But I was wrong. He was really wrong. If I knew that she would be kidnapped by the Dragon Legion and be buried here, I would rather let her be sick by my side than lose her life. This subject fought for your Majesty and became your Majesty's sharp blade. Many outsiders said that this subject was a good man. But this valiant subject couldn't even protect his wife. Pang Xiao hung his head. It was unknown whether it was rainwater or tears, but they fell from his messy hair, slid down his resolute and handsome face, and dripped from his chin to his muscular chest. His words evoked the compassion of everyone present. A tough man with outstanding military achievements was unable to protect his new wife. The people buried in this cave were obviously the Dragon Stallion army that Li Qitian had arranged to find the treasure. If he said that the Prince Zhongshuan's wife's situation had nothing to do with your Majesty, who would believe that? When Li Qitian heard this, he was so angry that his lips quivered. For a long time, he didn't know what to say. Who was Pang Xiao trying to impress with his affectionate and unrepentant appearance? If he really cared about the life and death of the Qin clan, why would he have forcefully seized the Qin clan and made things difficult for them? Li Qitian suspected that Pang Xiao was involved in the loss of the treasure and purposely sent Qin Yining to die to gain sympathy from others to cover up his dirty actions. You don't have to be so sad, Li Qitian said in a low voice. I won't hold you accountable now. Let's focus on digging first. We haven't dug it out yet, but when we get here, it will be clear. It won't be too late to discuss this matter then. Your Majesty's words mean that this subject arranged for a woman to steal the treasure? Li Qitian's face darkened. Indeed, no man would give such an important matter to a woman to do. Li Qitian knew that Qin Yining was extremely smart and was different from normal women. However, no one present knew this. He pretended to be lenient, but his words made him seem too harsh. In front of so many people from the Dragon Legion, he couldn't help but reveal his lowly side. Forget it. I pity that you lost the princess and feel depressed, so I won't blame you for your inappropriate words. However, you have to be careful. Li Qitian put one hand behind his back and pointed at Pang Xiao with the other. Pang Xiao wasn't in the mood to argue with Li Qitian. Logically, he shouldn't argue with Li Qitian in front of others. He cupped his hands and bowed, then turned back to continue digging. Under the collapse of the cave, The soft soil was dug up bit by bit. The corpses of the Dragon Legion and Qin Tian Alliance were slowly revealed. Finally, a few chests were revealed. One could vaguely see silver placed on top of them. Li Qiqian's eyes lit up. He hurriedly ordered people to move the silver out and count it. Pang Xiao found a hole in the wall, not far behind the chests. He could vaguely hear the sound of water dripping from inside. Pang Xiao hurriedly leaned over to take a look. He turned back and ordered Huzi, "Quickly bring a lantern." Huzi hurriedly raised his head and shouted at the people on the ground for a lantern. He then took the lantern and passed it to Pang Xiao, who was squatting in the hole. Pang Xiao once again put the lantern into the hole. "Is anyone there, Sister Yi?" In the hole, a faint rustling sound could be heard, followed by a weak female voice. Wang Yi? Is that Wang Yi?" Pang Xiao was overjoyed. He hurriedly said, "It's me. Are you Bing Tang? Where's the princess? Come out quickly. Who else is inside?" Bing Tang's breathing was weak. "My leg is broken. I can't come out. Ji Yun is also here. She's injured." Pang Xiao was very anxious. He couldn't say anything more. He first rescued Bing Tang and Ji Yun with Huzi. Ji Yun's body was covered with knife wounds. She had lost too much blood and was unconscious. One of Bing Tang's legs was probably fractured. She was in so much pain that her face turned pale. Li Qiqian also heard that there were survivors. He came forward with his hands behind his back to take a look. Pang Xiao grabbed Bing Tang's arm and asked, "Where's the princess? Where's the princess?" Bing Tang's tears flowed down. I don't know. At that time, there were people trying to kill us. The princess hid me behind a box and told me to think of a way to escape. I kept hiding. I saw the princess being slashed by a person wearing a Dragon Legion uniform. There was a big wound on her shoulder and a lot of blood flowed out. At that time, there was a scuffle in the cave. At this point, Bing Tang looked at Li Qiqian and changed the topic. "We were walking well with the princess. However, we encountered robbers. Those people even dressed up as Dragon Legion soldiers and kidnapped the princess. The princess's guards resisted with their lives. However, they were outnumbered. I don't know if the princess is dead or alive." After hearing Bing Tang say that Qin Yining was injured and bled a lot, Pang Xiao panicked. He was not in the mood to think about which part of Bing Tang's story was true and which part was false, because there was only one thought in his mind, which was whether Qin Yining was alive or dead. She asked Bing Tang to hide, but she didn't. Bing Tang and Ji Yun were usually inseparable from Qin Yining. The two of them hid in those small holes. Why didn't I see Qin Yining? Was Qin Yining killed or buried here? Thinking of this, Pang Xiao didn't have any other thoughts. He anxiously jumped down and continued to dig. Chapter 467. At this time, the people digging had worked in the rain for an entire afternoon. Everyone was tired, cold, and hungry. But Pang Xiao was not willing to stop. He pursed his lips and carefully cleaned the mud and water. He carefully used the dim candlelight to search for clues. He did not want to let go of even a single thread. Seeing him suddenly search so carefully, the Jinghu Wei also squatted beside him. "Wang Yi, are we not looking for her?" Pang Xiao said in a dry voice. "I am confirming if there are any accessories of Sister Yi here. You all look carefully. Not only do we need to find her, we cannot let go of any clues." Yes. The four Jinghu Wei received the order and carefully searched in the mud. They really were not willing to let go of any details. The originally tired Dragon Stallion army heard the conversation between Pang Xiao and Li Qiqian. Seeing Pang Xiao's affectionate and unregretful appearance, they did not feel tired or cold and spontaneously helped. Li Qiqian was currently looking at the several large chests that had just been brought up. In the end, he discovered that most of the chests were empty. There was only a layer of silver ingots on top of the chests. His entire body was deflated. There was no treasure in this cave. He was willing to give up the lives of so many Jinghu Wei in order to find the treasure. Now he was empty-handed. Not only did he expose his intentions, he might be hated by Pang Xiao. Li Qiqian looked at Pang Xiao, who was seriously searching in the cave. Seeing him look so crazy, he could not help but grit his teeth and feel nervous. They had fought together. Others did not understand Pang Xiao's personality, but he understood. This time, he had lost his Wang Fei. Pang Xiao might not love Qin Yining very deeply, but it had hurt his dignity and involved his reputation. He would not let this matter go easily. It would be great if Qin Yining could be found. He could also capture him and interrogate him. Then, he would be in the right. However, if Qin Yining really died like this, not only would there be no evidence, but with these large chests in front of them, he would be suspected of killing his wife for the sake of the treasure. Qin Yining's father was Qin Huaiyuan, whom he had always wanted to put in an important position. Her husband was also a military general who could intimidate a region. If these two men had a disagreement with him, the consequences would be too horrible to contemplate. Thinking to this point, Li Qiqian felt endless regret. If he had known this would happen, he would have investigated thoroughly before making his move. Now that the cave had collapsed, the dead could not bear witness. Even if he had a reason, he would have no one to speak his mind. On the contrary, he would only invite criticism. However, when he picked up the silver ingot and examined it carefully, Li Qiqian discovered that the silver ingot was indeed made in Dian, so he felt a little better. In this way, it was even more proof that the silver came from that batch of treasures. It seemed that the real treasure might be nearby. Li Qiqian did not hesitate anymore. With a wave of his hand, he instructed the Dragon Stallion army not to gather here and to also start investigating nearby. 2 hours later, the entire cave appeared in front of everyone's eyes, while everyone was busy but not panicking. There was no treasure, only corpses wearing the uniform of the Dragon Stallion army and commoner clothing. After doing a count, Li Qiqian discovered that the Dragon Stallion army he had sent out had been completely wiped out. Without the whereabouts of the silver and having lost so many people, Li Qiqian felt both dejected and angry. He patted the fake chest beside him. Such a small amount of silver was like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood when compared to the state treasury and internal funds that were currently in deficit. He had heard that Pang Xiao had taken out 50,000 taels of silver for disaster relief. A person like Wang Yi could take out this amount of silver, but as the emperor, he had not sent any rice or silver for disaster relief. How would others view him? Pang Xiao cleaned up the entire cave and did not find Qin Yining's corpse, so he relaxed a little. At least this proved that Qin Yining might not be dead. Pang Xiao immediately ordered Jinghu Wei and Huzi, "Send people to surround this area. Don't let go of any clues. We must find the princess's whereabouts." Yes, Huzi and Jinghu Wei acknowledged and went to carry out their tasks. Li Qiqian saw Pang Xiao's shirtless and muddy appearance and could not help but say, "Come up and rest for a while. Have a cup of hot tea to warm up your body. We still haven't found the Qin clan, right? Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she's tied up by something important. If you want to find her, you have to make sure that she's fine." Without waiting for Pang Xiao to reply, Li Qiqian already had a guess in his heart. Qin Yining might have gone to find the treasure. It seemed that Pang Xiao's place had to be closely guarded. Pang Xiao was not in the mood to rest at all. He politely rejected Li Qiqian's arrangement and continued to lead people to search around the cave. He even went to the cave where Bing Tang and Ji Yun were hiding to investigate. In the end, there was no sign of Qin Yining's whereabouts. Pang Xiao expanded the search area and used the borrowed Dragon Legion to cooperate with Jinghu Wei to expand the search area. They searched inch by inch and did not let go of any grass or tree, hoping to find some clues. After a day, Pang Xiao found the heavily injured Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, young man, and a Han. They were all unconscious and had been placed in a cave. Their injuries had been treated simply. It was obvious that someone had placed them here. Pang Xiao's heart pounded. He really wanted to know the situation at that time. However, Bing Tang and Ji Yun had not woken up yet. The 4 spies were also unconscious. At this time, the relief funds from the disaster area finally arrived. Although it was not much, many of the disaster victims had already died. Li Qiqian could still afford to feed the remaining people. Therefore, Pang Xiao completely put aside the disaster area matters and focused on finding Qin Yining's whereabouts. However, after hearing Bing Tang and Jian describe the situation in the cave in detail, Pang Xiao still felt his heart turn cold. Fear engulfed his entire body. She was cut by a knife? Yes. In order to protect this servant, the princess consort hid this servant behind the box. She said that she could not escape and asked me to survive. She wanted me to find Wang Yi and warn Wang Yi to be on guard. Pang Xiao closed his eyes. The pain in his heart was like a knife twisting. Ji Yun weakly described the situation at that time in detail. In the end, she said, I don't know who is more brave and fierce than the men of sacrifice brought by Second Master Lu. At that time, we were all injured. The cave collapsed too badly. It was pitch black, and we cannot see anything clearly. We wanted to rush over, but the roof collapsed and blocked the way. At that time, Bing Tang called me and pulled me to hide behind the box. Later, after the cave collapsed, we had no choice but to crawl into the cave at the side. Although there was ventilation and water there, we really could not get out. Fortunately, Wang Yi rushed over and saved this servant. At this point, Ji Yun's tears fell like rain. This servant is useless. I did not protect the princess consort well. This servant is really ashamed to face Wang Yi. Ji Yun knelt on the ground in shame and kowtowed repeatedly. Chapter 468. Pang Xiao shook his head and motioned for Ji Yun and Bing Tang to stand up. He analyzed. Sister, you should not have been buried. Now, we can confirm that she was kidnapped along with Qin Tian Alliance's people and Lu Heng's people. The 4 spies who followed you are still seriously injured and unconscious. Only bodyguard Xiao is missing. With her personality, she will definitely do everything she can to chase after them. Yes, bodyguard Xiao has always been protecting Princess Consort and never retreated. At that time, this servant and bodyguard Xiao shielded Princess Consort behind us. This servant's martial arts skills are not as good as bodyguard Xiao's. Bodyguard Xiao fought bravely and fiercely. Her injuries should be more serious than this servant's, Ji Yun said confidently. Pang Xiao nodded. That means that the 4 unconscious people were most likely saved by bodyguard Xiao. And now, she might be chasing after the kidnappers with her injuries. Ji Yun and Bing Tang's eyes lit up when they heard this. This means that Princess Consort should be fine. Pang Xiao sighed softly and said, at least when the ground dragon turned over, her life should not be in danger. I just don't know what happened after she left. At this point, Pang Xiao frowned worriedly again. She is injured after all. She was just sick a while ago. Now, she is injured and lost blood again. I don't know if she... Pang Xiao felt that he could not continue speaking, because he could not imagine the scene of Qin Yining being kidnapped while covered in blood. As long as he thought of Qin Yining suffering like that, he hated that he could not immediately kill all the people who caused her to be in this state, including himself. Not only did Pang Xiao doubt himself, he even started to regret it. At that time, if he had not pestered Qin Yining would still be able to live a prosperous life after marrying a peddler. With her ability, it would not be difficult for her to run a business. Perhaps he would have lived a peaceful and stable life a long time ago. Why would he have to face so many disasters? At that time, he always thought that since he had an idea, he should not waste his life. Who would have thought that she would be embroiled in the turmoil of the imperial court and suffer so much? Ji Yun and Bing Tang saw Pang Xiao's entanglement and self-blame, but other than saying a word of comfort, they could not find any other way to ease it, because in their hearts, they were actually as guilty and distressed as Pang Xiao. Unfortunately, their abilities were limited and they couldn't save Qin Yining's life. If the Qin Yining really couldn't get away with it this time, they had no choice but to follow him. Percent Wali Qitian was in charge of the disaster relief. He continued to arrange for people to search for the whereabouts of the treasure in Yang County. However, after searching for so long, he still found nothing. So much gold and silver seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Li Qitian could not stay in Yang County forever. He was also afraid that someone would take the opportunity to cause trouble when he was not in the capital. Therefore, after instructing people to continue searching here, Li Qitian decided to return to the capital. Before leaving, Li Qitian instructed Pang Xiao, go back with Zhen. After being out for so long, there must be a lot of court affairs to deal with in the capital. You won't be able to help much even if you stay here. Court affairs are more important. Zhen has already instructed people to search for the whereabouts of the Qin clan here. You don't have to be anxious. Pang Xiao only sneered when he heard this. Your Majesty can go back. Your subordinates can't even find a dead object like the treasure that doesn't move. How can this official dare to expect them to find a living person? I can find my own wife. As for the affairs of the court, His Majesty is so talented and has so many capable officials to help him. It's really not a big deal to have one less official. Li Qitian's face flushed with anger when he heard Pang Zhao's words. He rebuked in a deep voice. Pang Zhishi, who do you think you're talking to? You are speaking so disrespectfully to Zhen. This is simply treason. This official is not worthy of your Majesty's praise. Pang Zhao's smile was mocking, and his words were filled with hostility. If this official had the slightest bit of treason, this official would not have fallen to this state. I don't even have the manpower to find a wife. If it was in the past, when he was leading the Tiger Army, not to mention searching for a person, even an ant hole could be searched like a carpet. However, he did not have enough manpower now. His military power had been taken away. Even if he ignored Li Qitian's opposition and surveillance and mobilized 100 people from Jinghu Wei, he only had 100 people. Li Qitian's eyes narrowed dangerously. You have resentment in your heart. In reality, you are blaming Zhen. Pang Zhao's voice rose a bit. This official does not have the energy or the mind to blame anyone. This official only wants to find Sister Yi. If he can find her, then it's fine. I believe that your Majesty also has questions to ask him. If he can't find her, this official really does not know what he will do. What did she do wrong? She returned to the capital to recuperate, but halfway through, she was kidnapped. The ones who were dug out were the Dragon Stallion army arranged by your Majesty. Don't let your imagination run wild. Li Qitian felt a bit guilty. This official is not making wild guesses. This official only sees the facts in front of my eyes. This official has worked hard for your Majesty, but your Majesty let this official's wife die. You, Pang Zhishi, how dare you? Do you think that Zhen does not dare to kill you? Your Majesty is wealthy. What is there to be afraid of? Pang Xiao scowled. His usual calmness and wisdom had long been replaced by brutality. Something happened to Qin Yining. It was as if his soul had been taken away by someone. He felt that he was no longer a complete person. Unless he could find her, he really did not know what crazy things he would do. He did not even want to protect his country anymore. He wanted to destroy this empire. He did not even want to care about human lives anymore. Pang Xiao was a person who had fought with blood on the battlefield. Once he became cold, the murderous aura around him could freeze the air. Li Qitian felt a sense of superiority when facing Pang Xiao's submission. However, when facing a furious Pang Xiao, he really did not dare to provoke him. Forget it. Do as you wish. Li Qitian thought that a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. He did not want Pang Xiao to go berserk in front of him and hurt him. Pang Xiao saw through Li Qitian's misgivings and could not help but sneer. When Qin Yining was by his side, he only felt that the years were peaceful and everything was worth looking forward to. Now that Qin Yining had disappeared, he was the only one left to search desperately. Only then did he understand that his peaceful years were tied to that person. If this person did not exist in this world, then what was the point of living a peaceful life? It was better to destroy everything. After Li Qitian returned to the capital, he sent a memorial every 4 or 5 days to urge Pang Xiao to return to the capital. However, Pang Xiao acted as if he did not see it. He continued to search for clues in the vicinity of the old capital and continued to expand outwards. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. It was snowing heavily in the old capital. Pang Xiao had resisted 23 imperial edicts, and the imperial censor had reported them more than 50 times. However, Li Qitian had not issued any edicts, as if he was indulging him. This was the first time this had happened since the establishment of the Zhou. Just as Pang Xiao was anxiously searching for Qin Yining's whereabouts, outside the Xiongmen Pass in the north of Dezhou, a caravan was passing through a vast desert in Titan territory with difficulty. Chapter 469. The best part of the journey from Dezhou to the Titan capital wasn't as bad as it was now. However, along the way, they encountered all kinds of trouble. Who knew where so many bandits came from, forcing the team to enter the desert? Qin Yining was wearing a coarse cotton dress that was so dirty that the color couldn't be seen. She had a coarse scarf wrapped around her head and face. She held a thick and strong branch in her hand as she followed the team with difficulty. Her injuries had already healed, but her body was weaker than before. They had already been in the desert for 10 days. In fact, if they weren't unlucky enough to encounter the sandstorm, they wouldn't be in such a miserable state. At least the water they brought was enough to eat. It was a pity that the heavens seemed to like playing tricks on them. Qin Yining also didn't expect that the Titan people would travel thousands of miles to Dezhou to find the treasure. Moreover, they had been searching for the treasure for a long time. When the heavens and earth were shaking, she and the others were just about to reach the entrance of the cave when they were stopped by the Titan prince consort Si Qin's men. Si Qin looked like a handsome scholar who didn't look like a Titan man. However, he was actually a cruel and merciless person who didn't show any mercy when killing people. At that time, the Dragon Stallion army didn't leave anyone alive. Lu Heng's men, including her and Mrs. Liao, were all brought out. However, after entering the desert and encountering the sandstorm, all of Lu Heng's men were abandoned in the desert by Si Qin. He didn't kill them directly. Instead, he chased them into the yellow sand and left them to fend for themselves. In this team, there was the Titan prince consort Si Qin and 20 men of sacrifice that Si Qin had brought. Mrs. Liao and 2 followers from the Qingtian alliance, Lu Heng and Qin Yining. Qin Yining's feet felt like they were filled with lead. Her lips were dry and cracked, and she was so thirsty that she couldn't speak. The last time she drank water was early in the morning, and everyone drank a mouthful to moisten their throats. At that time, Qin Yining couldn't bear to swallow the saliva. Instead, he kept it in his mouth for a long time so that it wouldn't feel too dry during the journey. But even so, they still didn't have enough water. Stop! Si Qin stopped the team. Qin Yining was panting as he supported himself with a tree branch. He wanted to see what Si Qin was going to do. Si Qin walked straight to Mrs. Liao and the 2 Qingtian alliance members. He spoke in fluent Dezhou language. We don't have enough water right now. You must tell me where the treasure is, or I will leave you here. Mrs. Liao was silent. The 2 members of the Azure Sky Alliance were on the verge of tears. They were the ones who received the least amount of water. Was he going to leave them here? Hurry up and tell them. That's right. Why are you still hiding things at this time? If you don't tell me, you'll lose your life. Is the treasure more important than your life? You've already killed so many of our brothers, and now you want to kill us too. The 2 people's mouths were dry, and their voices were hoarse and unpleasant, but they still spared no effort in persuading Mrs. Liao. Mrs. Liao looked haggard and her cheeks were sunken, but she still smiled confidently. To tell you the truth, I'm the only one who knows the location of the treasure. If you let me die, then you won't get the treasure for the rest of your life. Si Qin adjusted his scarf and said without raising his eyebrows, and then, you mean you don't want to tell me? Mrs. Liao said, unless you agree to my conditions, I won't tell you the location of the treasure. When Si Qin heard this, his eyebrows curved into a smile. A dimple appeared on his handsome face, making him seem very amiable and likable. We don't care about the treasure at all. If you want to tell us, I can let you live. If you don't want to tell us, then we don't care about the treasure. Si Qin waved his hand, and 2 strong men pulled the 2 spineless Qingtian alliance members away. They walked 100 steps and threw them onto the sand. The 2 people ate a mouthful of sand, but they didn't dare to stay. They struggled to get up, spat out the sand in their mouths, and staggered back. Mrs. Liao saw the 2 people return, and her smile became more confident. The Emperor of Dezhou and the late Emperor of Dian both needed the treasure and wanted it for themselves. You say you don't care about it, but I don't believe you. How can you prove it to me? Si Qin was amused by Mrs. Liao. You're an interesting woman, but without the treasure, my army is still my army. There's no difference between you and me. If you don't want to tell us, then so be it. You guys go away together. We will no longer provide you with water and food. You can only pray for your own fortune." After saying this, Si-Chin smiled and nodded to Mrs. Liao. Then, he turned back and led everyone away. She really didn't want the treasure? Qin Yining was suspicious. The treasure was hidden by Mrs. Liao. Apart from the person who would definitely be silenced, Mrs. Liao might really be the only one who knew the whereabouts of the treasure. She said she was going to give up on Mrs. Liao. Was she deliberately trying to scare her? Mrs. Liao thought she could use the treasure to negotiate, but who knew that the other party would be so straightforward and give up just like that? Qin Yining watched from the sidelines for so many days. Si-Chin was actually a very strange person. He looked like a scholar, but he was actually very skilled at martial arts. He wasn't weak at all. According to Tian Jizi's calculations, one of the 3 malefic stars, Tan Lang, was in the Titan. Combined with Si-Chin's achievements and rumors in the Titan, he should be the Grand Marshal who fought with Jiziyu for many years. The Titan princess, Ainari, supported the Prince Regent, passed away due to illness. Ainari became the Titan's female Khan, and Si-Chin became Ainari's son-in-law. Even so, Si-Chin was still in charge of the Titan army. Every day, he made Ainari happy. He could also do some of his own things in private. For example, he kidnapped so many people while searching for the treasure. Therefore, Qin Yining felt that Si-Chin's action of giving up the treasure was strange. Shouldn't the people who feed the army plan for more food and provisions? Qin Yining didn't want to talk because she needed to maintain her strength. Si-Chin really did what he said. Mrs. Liao and the 2 Qin Tian alliance members chased after the group. They stumbled all the way and could fall at any time. However, Si-Chin really didn't give them a drop of water or a bite of food. He didn't catch up until the 3 of them fell behind. Qin Yining also wanted to save them. However, she didn't have water or food. When Si-Chin distributed the remaining water, Qin Yining had a whole new level of respect for Qin Yining. He would first let the 20 death warriors who followed him drink water first. Si-Chin would restrain himself and drink a mouthful of water. He would only give the rest to the kidnapped people. Lu Hong had the highest status in Si-Chin's heart, so he was given the most water. Qin Yining was second. Now that Mrs. Liao and the other 2 had been abandoned, if they still couldn't get out of the desert, she would be the next one to give up. Qin Yining knew this, so she calmly thought of a solution while walking. Qin Yining was quiet, never threw a tantrum, and was very patient. Si-Chin couldn't help but walk beside her. Chapter 470. Qin Yining actually didn't have the energy to chat anymore. She was injured and had lost blood again. Her body, which had not recovered, was damaged again. Moreover, she had been kidnapped this time and didn't have the means to properly recover. Therefore, she was very weak right now. If it weren't for the fact that she had been holding on with one last breath, gritting her teeth and telling herself that she couldn't relax, she might really be abandoned here once she relaxed. She might also become a burden that they abandoned. It's nothing much. I just want to live. Qin Yining's throat was unbearably dry. She didn't want to say anything else and only gave this answer indifferently. She didn't even look at Si-Chin. Si-Chin became even more interested when she saw her indifference. If you were an ordinary woman, you have tried your best to flatter me in order to live a better life. However, you are different from them. Qin Yining looked straight ahead and said, "You should speak less and conserve more energy." Si-Chin was refuted, but she wasn't angry. Instead, she laughed to herself as she walked beside Qin Yining. Her laughter was hoarse, but there was joy from the bottom of her heart. The men of sacrifice walking in front couldn't help but turn back to look at her. Then, they turned back to whisper again. Even though they had been trekking in the desert for so long, Qin Yining's appearance was still beautiful in the eyes of these men. Unlike the tall and strong Titan women, Qin Yining, who was a beauty born in Jiangnan, was very different in the eyes of these men. If she wasn't the princess consort of Pang Zhishi, these men would have some thoughts about her. However, Si-Chin didn't allow them to make a move on her. Now that they saw Si-Chin laughing like that, the men all understood. It seemed that the prince consort's heart had been moved, and he had feelings for this beauty. Although Inari Khan is also beautiful, she is also very beautiful. However, her tyrannical and domineering attitude towards others had already made them tired of her beauty. This delicate and weak beauty was the polar opposite of Inari. As the men walked, they thought that if Si-Chin had feelings for this girl, they would find a way to help him cover it up. However, as soon as these people formed their thoughts, a cloud of dust approached from the front. What was coming from afar was actually a group of horses. Prince Consort, look. The one in front put his hand on his forehead and looked into the distance. He shouted excitedly, "It's our people!" It was the Khan. The Khan is here. It really is Khan. Prince Consort, we're saved. The men were no longer dispirited as they cheered loudly in excitement. Si-Chin was also overjoyed and hurried to greet him. Qin Yining leaned on a tree branch and stood in place, exchanging glances with Lu Heng, who was also in a similar sorry state. Their group of people had been kidnapped. When they set off, there were more than 10 of them, but now, only the 2 of them were left. Their eyes were filled with the joy of surviving a calamity and the confusion of the unknown future. None of them knew how Inari would treat them. At this moment, Si-Chin had already rushed to the front of the group. "Inari, you're here." A beautiful woman in a bright red riding outfit and a silver-white snow fox fur cloak urged her horse forward. Her appearance couldn't be considered outstanding, but her facial features could be considered regular. However, the aura around her was very valiant. Her every movement revealed a valiant and domineering aura. When she saw Si-Chin, a smile appeared on her face. She reined in her horse and jumped down. Like a little girl who was looking forward to being cherished, she quickly walked forward. "It wasn't easy to find you. You were gone for so long, but you refused to let anyone pass a message to me. You made me so worried." Si-Chin held Inari's hands, a gentle smile on his handsome face. "How did you find your way to the desert? I brought some people along the way to pick you up, but we didn't manage to find you. Later on, I heard that a group of people had been attacked by bandits and were heading in the direction of the desert. I was worried that you had encountered a calamity, so I wanted to chase after you. It was my people who reminded me that it would be better to take the official road back to the capital and then come here from the capital. Otherwise, we would also be trapped in the desert." Si-Chin smiled and touched Inari's face. "You're so nice." Inari's face instantly flushed red. He said uncomfortably, "For your safety, I should do anything. Did you have fun in Ajo this time?" "It was all right. We didn't get the treasure, but we caught a few people. There wasn't enough water on the way, so I threw some people away. Now, there are only 2 left." Si-Chin pointed behind him as he spoke. Inari looked in the direction of Si-Chin's finger and met Lu Heng and Qin Yining's gazes. Being exposed to the wind and the sun in the desert, even if a celestial being descended from the heavens, he wouldn't look any better. Moreover, Qin Yining and Lu Heng were wearing coarse clothes and dirty scarves covered in sand. Their hair was also in a mess. Inari glanced at them casually and asked, "Who are they?" "One of them is the second son of the Lu family in Dezhou. The other is the princess consort of Prince Zhongshuan. Initially, I caught a survivor of the Qingtian Alliance. However, the Qingtian Alliance refused to tell me the whereabouts of the treasure. Keeping them would only be a waste of water and food, so I threw them away." "You did well." Inari ordered someone to bring out a water bottle and distribute the water and dry food to everyone. Si-Chin and Inari sat at the side, chatting and laughing softly. Qin Yining and Lu Heng were given a half-empty water bag and a dry biscuit each. Qin Yining didn't dare to eat it all at once, in case something unexpected happened along the way. He only ate a few bites of the tasteless dry biscuits with cold water. Lu Heng frowned as he ate. He said softly, "It's been hard on you. You're still weak." Qin Yining smiled bitterly and said softly, "I'm already lucky to be alive. If the Khan hadn't rushed over, I would have been the next one thrown away." Lu Heng smiled bitterly as well. No one expected that they would end up like this after coming here for the treasure. They didn't know how Inari would treat them when they reached the Titan capital. When Qin Yining and Lu Heng were talking, Inari and Si-Chin's attention was on the 2 of them. Si-Chin said softly, The Liu family's second master Liu and Minister Qin's daughter aren't simple people. We can take them back and temporarily raise them. Even if we can't get any secrets about the treasure, we can use them as hostages to negotiate with the Zhou Emperor. We can also make a lot of money. I believe that this will bring us more benefits than the treasure. Inari smiled. You're right. We'll do as you say. The Khan always indulges me like this. It makes me feel bad. Si Qin said shyly. Inari looked at Si Qin's handsome face and couldn't help but blush. He said, You and I are husband and wife. Shouldn't I support you? How can you indulge me? Chapter 471. Si Qin's face tightened when he heard this, his expression turning serious as he said, How could I be such a person? My feelings for the Khan are true. Heaven and earth can prove it. The Khan is such an extraordinary woman. She is much more beautiful than those who only have looks. I admire and adore the Khan. My feelings for the Khan have never changed after all these years. Si Qin's gaze was too passionate, causing Inari's face to turn red. She looked at Si Qin with both joy and shyness as she muttered, Of course I trust the prince consort's character. Si Qin was moved as he held onto Inari's hands and slowly leaned over. Inari looked down in embarrassment and closed her eyes, waiting for the kiss to come. When the men at the side saw this, they drank water and ate their rations while trying to hold back their laughter. In their hearts, they were praising the prince consort for being so powerful. He was both handsome and talented. Only such a man would be able to tame such a shrewish woman like the Khan. Perhaps because there were too many people around, Si Qin did not kiss Inari and only rubbed his forehead against hers. Such an intimate action was even more arousing than a kiss. Inari was treated so preciously. How could she remember anything else? She only felt that she was about to melt into a puddle of water and melt into Si Qin's gentleness. That little bit of suspicion just now had long been thrown out of the window. However, when she glanced at Qin Yining and saw Qin Yining's face that could not hide his beauty under the dirt, Inari still felt stifled in her heart. This kind of vixen was really annoying. The group rested for a while before they set off again. This time, they had enough water and rations, and they could confirm their direction. They also knew that they would be able to leave the desert soon. Everyone's mood was different from before, and they were all relaxed and happy. However, as captives, Qin Yining and Lu Heng were not assigned horses. They still had to rely on their feet to walk behind the group of horses. Qin Yining tried her best to steady her breathing. She told herself that at least she had water and food now. She didn't have to worry about these people abandoning her in the desert. If Pang Xiao was here, she might have fainted without worry. But when there was no one around to rely on, she had to be strong. Finally, after walking for an entire day, they saw the oasis at the end of the desert in the evening. That was not a mirage, but an oasis that truly existed in front of his eyes. They finally left the desert and set foot on the territory of the Tartars. Everyone rested for a while in a nearby tribe. When they heard that the Khan and the prince consort had come to visit, the leader immediately offered up his most spacious and clean tent and served them the most delicious roasted meat and milk wine. Qin Yining and Lu Heng were finally able to wash off the sand on their bodies and change into clean Tatan clothes. The clothes that the leader offered were all exquisite. Inside was a long robe with narrow sleeves that had a slit on both sides. On the outside was a light yellow outer robe with long sleeves that reached the elbows. The outermost layer was a red brocade waistcoat with a round collar and a row of pure silver buttons that shone with a silver light. Her hair was neatly tied up by a maid. She wore a hat with red agate and silver tassel pendants on both sides. In the middle of the hat, a row of red agate tassel beads fell in front of her forehead, right between her eyebrows. It made her palm-sized face look as white and tender as cream. The maid smiled and communicated with her in Tatan language. Qin Yining didn't understand what she was saying, so she politely smiled at her. The maid mumbled something and brought a pair of red soft boots inlaid with lace for her. Qin Yining smiled and thanked her, then put on the boots. The maid looked at Qin Yining, and her eyes lit up. She excitedly circled around her and looked at her for a while. Then she said something, covered her face with her hands, and excitedly walked out. Qin Yining frowned slightly. She tiredly lay down on the wooden bed by the window. She was alert and didn't dare to fall asleep. However, the exhaustion from the long journey in the desert was not something that an ordinary person could endure. Moreover, she had just recovered from her injuries and hadn't eaten her fill. Qin Yining unknowingly fell asleep. Not long after, Qin walked into the tent and saw the beauty lying by the window. The agate beads and tassels hung on her forehead, softly supporting her white cheeks. Her other arm was resting on her waist. Because she was sleeping on her side, the close-fitting long robe and waistcoat outlined her mountain-like figure vividly. Qin stood at the door in a daze. He stared at her for a long time, but he didn't remember what he was doing. It wasn't until she heard the crackling sound of a small pile of firewood burning in the middle of the ground that Qin recovered from her stupor and shock. Dezhou was a wonderful place. The land was rich in water and resources. Even the women were delicate and fair. Their skin was as white as milk tofu. That was why he was so obsessed with the land in the south. Compared to the Taitan, where most of the tribes were nomadic, Dezhou was a farming country that was more suitable for long-term development. Qin slowly walked towards Qin Yining. His footsteps were very light, like a cat that was tiptoeing. He slowly approached the bed. He reached out his right hand, which was wearing a red agate ring. Just as his fingertips were about to touch Qin Yining's cheek, the beauty on the bed suddenly opened her eyes and looked straight at him. When Qin's eyes met hers, he was so shocked by her sharp gaze that he forgot to continue moving. Qin Yining frowned. She slapped his hand away and stood up. She stared at him with sharp eyes and said in a cold and sharp voice, "What is Prince Consort doing?" Qin's hand burned with pain from the slap. He clenched his fist and placed it behind his back. He smiled warmly and said, "There's a bonfire up ahead. They're preparing to roast a whole lamb. I came to call you over to eat together." Qin Yining narrowed his eyes and said, "I don't understand what Prince Consort means." "You don't understand? What don't you understand?" Qin's eyes stared straight at her opening and closing cherry lips. Qin Yining said, "On the way here, Prince Consort treated me the same as the other captives. Other than occasionally speaking normally, we didn't have any interactions. You're the high and mighty Prince Consort, and your wife is the Taitan Khan. Right now, I'm just a captive under your control. In this kind of situation, I don't even have the right to eat a whole lamb. Even if you wanted me to eat it, why would Prince Consort have to personally lower himself and act like that?" Qin's eyes flashed. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face. "You really are an intelligent woman. I didn't expect you to be so sharp." Qin Yining looked back at him with an expression that said, "Don't tease me. There's such an obvious difference. Anyone would be able to tell, right? Or is it because Prince Consort is too confident in himself? Do you think that as long as you show a good face, all women will be charmed until they lose their sense of direction?" When Qin heard this, his eagle eyes immediately narrowed. His gaze was filled with a strong, murderous intent. Chapter 472. When Qin Yining saw Qin's expression, she immediately knew what was going on. At first, she had felt that Qin's behavior was very strange. Just as she had said, Qin's attitude towards people in the desert was very different from when he had met the Khan. She did not care about his attitude towards others, but Qin had not treated her in any special way at the beginning. Why was he acting as if he was deeply attracted to her now? She was not so naive as to think that there would be a chance for them to develop feelings for each other over time. Therefore, Qin Yining felt that there was something fishy going on. Qin was able to become the most respected person in Taitan after Nari. It was impossible for him to be as pure and loyal as he appeared to be. Furthermore, there were two other people who were equally as famous as Qin. One was her husband, and the other was Jiziyu. Qin Yining knew very well what kind of people they were. Qin Yining would never believe Qin's actions today. She had just arrived, so she had to be extremely vigilant to prevent herself from falling into a trap. Qin Yining thought for a long time, but it only took a moment. Qin also immediately retracted the coldness in his eyes, as if he was not the person who had been filled with killing intent just now. Princess really knows how to joke. It seems that Prince Zhongshuan dotes on Princess a lot. Qin Yining smiled, but did not say anything. Si Qin continued, "You don't need to be nervous. Since you know that Prince Zhongshuan does not care about you, then he will agree to whatever conditions we discuss with him. He will definitely spare your life. Naturally, your life will not be in danger." Qin Yining could not help but smile when she heard this. "Then I have to thank Prince Consort for not killing me." Si Qin didn't get angry when she heard this. Instead, she felt that Qin Yining's eyes were so bright and alluring that one couldn't help but want to look in her watery eyes. He took a few steps forward, raised his hand, and slid his finger across Qin Yining's cheek. However, she tilted her head and avoided his touch. At last it touched the chain of onyx beads that hung over her cheek under her bonnet. The bead chain swayed, and the sound of the agate beads colliding with each other was very crisp. Si Qin looked down at Qin Yining. From his angle, he could see the undisguised disgust and contempt on her pretty face. "You don't have to be angry with me. If you really want to be angry, you should be angry that your man didn't protect you well. Why did I let you come out alone and experience so many dangers along the way? I even brought you back to Tayton. You should know that your injuries were originally very serious. It was only because I found someone to treat you that you barely managed to keep your life. Don't you people from Dezhou all grow up reading books? Don't tell me that you don't know the meaning of gratitude." When Qin Yining heard this, the anger in her heart surged. She suddenly raised her head and glared at Si Qin. In a cold voice, she said, "Why should I be grateful to someone who kidnapped me? How do you know that I need you to save my life? I would rather die on Dezhou's soil and leave my corpse to my husband than let him search for me tirelessly like a headless fly and suffer all the time. In the end, I would even become a bargaining chip that you use to threaten him because of my ignoble existence." When she was angry, her eyes were so bright that they seemed to be lit by two clusters of flames. Looking at her, Si Qin's heart was ignited with a scorching fire. He grabbed Qin Yining's neck and forced her to raise her head to look at him. His malicious eyes stared into her eyes, and his voice seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. "You better not be joking with me. I'm a serious person. If you say that, I won't be able to resist the urge to kill you." Qin Yining was choked until she couldn't breathe, but she still refused to give in. She glared fiercely at Si Qin and said with difficulty, "I'm also a serious person. If you don't kill me, I'll be disappointed." Si Qin had never met a woman who was so unafraid of death. Perhaps he had met one in the past, but those women were far from being as beautiful and unforgettable as Qin Yining. She was a beautiful and intelligent woman of noble birth, but she also had such a hot temper. This made Si Qin envious of Peng Zhao's luck with women. Why didn't he have such good luck to have such a lovely wife? "What are you doing?" Just as Qin Yining was about to suffocate and was waiting for death with her eyes closed, an angry roar suddenly came from the door. Inari quickly rushed in. She stood at the door and saw that Si Qin and Qin Yining were so close together. She thought they were doing something intimate. She was so angry that her head was buzzing. She didn't care about anything else and roared loudly. She rushed in with the intention of teaching Qin Yining a lesson. But when she got closer, she realized that Si Qin wasn't doing anything intimate with Qin Yining. He was clearly going to kill her. Although Inari didn't like Si Qin touching other women, her anger had already dissipated by half. She couldn't help but ask in confusion, "What's going on? Didn't you want to use her to negotiate with Wang Yi from Dezhou? If you kill her now, we'll have one less bargaining chip." Si Qin seemed to have regained his rationality when he heard Inari's voice. He angrily slowly let go of her hand. As soon as he let go, Qin Yining's body couldn't help but sway. He fell to the ground and coughed violently. Si Qin clasped his hand behind his back and looked at Qin Yining. He said in a low voice, "I'll let you off this time for the sake of the Khan. If you dare to provoke me again, it won't end so easily." After saying those harsh words, Si Qin turned back to face Inari. He was as gentle as water again. Even when he smiled, his eyes were curved and his breath was mixed with honey. "Khan, I'm sorry to have frightened you." Si-Chin held Inari's hand. Inari looked at Si-Chin reproachfully. She didn't hide the displeasure in her voice as she said, "I'm not frightened. I'm just very angry. I thought that this vixen changed into a clean set of clothes and stole your soul." When Si-Chin heard this, his face instantly tensed up. "Khan, don't make such jokes in the future. Don't you know what kind of person I am? I've been in love with Khan for so long. Have you ever seen me seduce anyone? She's just an ordinary person. Even if a few fairies came from the heavens, they wouldn't be able to change my feelings for you." Inari was very moved by Si-Chin's words. Her eyes were filled with tears as she obediently nestled against Si-Chin's chest. She even rubbed against his chest like a spoiled kitten. Chapter 473. I've seen many women your age, but I've never seen a woman who isn't afraid of the enemy's sword. That day when you saved me, I saw you disregard your own safety and resolutely protect me. From then on, I only had you in my heart and in my eyes. No woman can be as outstanding as you, younger and more beautiful than you, and not have your talent and courage. But compared to your courage, I can't compare to your sincerity towards me. Khan, what else are you not confident about? In my heart, you're like a goddess. You're so precious that I wouldn't exchange it for 1,000 miles of land. Si-Chin's voice was low and gentle, and every word was sincere. Inari's face immediately turned red. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to bury herself in Si-Chin's arms and not come out. What are you talking about? How am I that good? I'm not beautiful enough, and I have a strong temper. You're the most elegant and outstanding man in Tayton. I've always known that you're the one who's at a disadvantage when we're together. Si-Chin, don't blame me for being suspicious. I'm really afraid of losing you. You're so outstanding, and I'm not good enough for you. Silly girl. Si-Chin used his finger to block Inari's lips. You're not allowed to belittle yourself like this. You're the Khan of Tayton, my wife, and my master. How are you not good enough for me? It's obvious that I'm not good enough for you. It's all my fault for making you feel so insecure. Inari, hit me. As long as you're not sad. How could I bear to? Inari raised her head and took the initiative to kiss Si-Chin's cheek. Si-Chin was touched by her lively and forthright action. He couldn't help but smile and lean over to kiss her. At this moment, Chin Ening was sitting on the ground with his eyes lowered. After listening to Si-Chin and Inari's sweet talk for a long time, he got goosebumps all over his body. His suspicions about Si-Chin grew even more. Although the relationship between husband and wife was good, it was normal for them to say such sweet words. However, between Si-Chin and Inari, it was obvious that Inari was in a position of inferiority. Si-Chin had to coax her with words so that she could live with him in a stable manner. Si-Chin's words were so pleasant to the ears that it was as if he had recited them countless times in his head. But why did Si-Chin treat Inari this way? Was it really just a husband's love for his wife? Chin Ening lowered her head. Her long eyelashes fluttered. Countless possibilities appeared in her mind, but they were all rejected by her after careful consideration. Chin Ening felt that there was still room for discussion as to how many of these pleasant words were true. In any case, if it were her, she wouldn't believe Si-Chin. This was because to test a person's sincerity, one didn't have to pay attention to what the other party said, but what they did. No matter how much Si-Chin said, it was an indisputable fact that he had taken the initiative to enter another woman's tent. Who would believe that they were going to interrogate the hostages, let alone interrogate them? Only a woman as honest as Inari would believe him. Chin Ening made up her mind that she should properly investigate the power structure of the Tayton during this period of time. She felt that Si-Chin was too cunning, while Inari was too honest. With the two of them together, Si-Chin could easily set up a trap for Inari to fall into. Si-Chin was only the emperor's son-in-law. No matter how outstanding he was, in the eyes of others, he was still someone who relied on women to get to where he was. Perhaps there were already disagreements between the two of them, and these are the factors that she could use to escape. At this moment, she suddenly felt a sharp pain on her scalp. She suddenly came back to her senses and realized that Inari had grabbed her hat. Even her hair that was hidden under the hat was pulled up, forcing her to stand up with Inari's strength. You slutty fox. In the future, Stay away from Ben Khan's men. If you're really so thirsty that you can't leave a man, don't blame Ben Khan for finding a dozen warriors to serve you. When had Qin Yining ever suffered such humiliation in her life? She was the kind of person who would rather die standing than live kneeling. Inari actually dared to grab her hair and say such disgusting words. Qin Yining wasn't going to back down. She immediately grabbed her hand and forcefully pulled it away. She then stood up and said mockingly, "I have long heard that the position of Khan of Tatar has been changed to a woman. Actually, when I heard about how the female regent of Tatar manages the state, I was already very curious and full of admiration for you. I just didn't expect that the regent that I admired would become a completely different person after becoming the Khan. Or have you always been a woman without confidence, always paranoid, and worried that your husband would fall for another woman? If you're really that capable, you should be confident that your husband wouldn't fall for anyone else other than you. But look at you now. You didn't keep your own dog on a leash, and you're blaming others. We're both women, but you can still say such disgusting words. Don't you feel ashamed of your manners?" Qin Yining's voice was clear and loud, like pearls falling on a jade plate. She spoke so quickly that no one could interrupt her. Inari was so angry that her face turned ashen. She pointed at Qin Yining and was so angry that she couldn't say anything. "You, who are you calling a dog? Didn't you hear it very clearly? It's really strange. How can there be people in this world who like to be scolded? Do you want me to scold you again so that you can listen carefully? How dare you? Good, you're still twisting words and forcing logic. You're clearly the one who used your beauty to seduce other people's men. You're afraid of death, so you won't live, so you seduce my man. Don't you think your actions are honorable? Which eye of yours saw me seducing? It's clearly your man who barged into my place. Even if I'm a hostage, you still need to use me to blackmail Pang Zhishi. Aren't you afraid that if I don't survive, Pang Zhishi will take revenge in anger?" Inari was so angry that she actually slowly forced herself not to be angered by this vixen in front of her. She didn't want to lose face in front of the prince consort. She seemed to have heard an incredible joke, and she actually covered her mouth and laughed like a blooming flower. How interesting, how interesting. I've never seen you being so stubborn, even though you're a captive. It seems like you don't care about life and death at all. You don't care whether we kill you or not. Anatri's fingers were still hurting because of Qin Yining's broken fingers. Looking at Qin Yining's face that became more and more beautiful in anger, the jealousy in her heart had already gushed out like magma. It was about to drown her. Inari pulled out an exquisite dagger embedded with gems from her boots and waved it towards Qin Yining's face. Chapter 474. Qin Yining did not expect Inari to be such a brainless person. She actually used a knife at the slightest disagreement. Her reaction was not slow either. She hurriedly took a step back and dodged the tip of the knife. However, no matter how nimble Qin Yining was, she did not know any martial arts. In a fit of anger, Inari was determined to make Qin Yining pay with her life. Even if she could not lose her life, she wanted to leave a few bloody scars on her face and turn her into a hideous monster. Inari used all her strength and aimed the knife at Qin Yining's face. Qin Yining nimbly dodged the knife, but her body was not organized. Because she had been weak for so long, her strength and stamina were not as valiant as Inari's. Soon, sweat appeared on her forehead. She tripped over herself and fell to the ground. Inari's eyes lit up. She saw an opportunity and immediately stabbed Qin Yining with the dagger. Si Qin finally had enough of watching the show. He went forward and held Inari's wrist. "All right, calm down, Khan." His gentle voice seemed to have a magical power that could dispel one's anger. It calmed Inari down a little. "Why are you stopping me? Let me disfigure her face first. Let's see if she can seduce men with it." Si Qin smiled as he took the dagger out of Inari's hand. He held her hand with one hand and said, "Silly girl, have you forgotten what I want to do with this woman? Do you know about the grudge between the Qin family and the Prince Zhongshuan's family?" Inari thought for a moment before she nodded and said, "Her father killed Prince Zhongshuan's father by driving a wedge between us." "That's right. Her family and Prince Zhongshuan's family have a grudge against each other. Why do you think Prince Zhongshuan is willing to marry such a woman? Anari vaguely understood. You mean beauty? Siqi nodded and said with a smile. Pang Zhishi likes her because of her face. If you destroy her face, Pang Zhishi won't like her anymore. What if he refuses to pay the ransom? Although it was right to think so, Anari still felt a little unbalanced. However, Anari's mood improved a little when he thought about the huge amount of gold and silver in the ransom. All right, Anari calmed down a little and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, I was hot-headed and didn't think about the prince consort's plan. It's okay. I know you care about me. Siqi held her hand and shook it. Anari's face was completely red. She was both proud and happy. She chatted and laughed with Siqi for a while longer. Then, like a little girl, she happily went out to participate in the roast lamb bonfire. It was as if she wasn't the one who wanted to kill someone with a knife just now. Qin Yining wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead with his sleeve. He thought to himself that Anari was simply a brainless lunatic. Seeing Siqi coax Anari like a child, Qin Yining felt that Anari's anger was a joke in Siqi's eyes. She could be appeased so easily. There was definitely something wrong with this Siqi. Siqi smiled and said, You saw it, right? Saw what? See how the prince consort coaxes the Khan? Siqi's face was full of pride. He approached Qin Yining again and said softly, In Tayton, the Khan listens to me the most. I have full confidence that I can persuade him to do anything. Siqi raised his hand and touched Qin Yining's cheek. If you're willing to be with me, I'll immediately persuade the Khan to let you go. What do you think? You won't lose anything from this deal. You're already married anyway. Even if something happens between us, as long as I don't say anything, no one will know. Even if your man pays a ransom for you in the future, as long as we don't tell him, you'll still be pure and pure. You'll still belong to him. Slap. Qin Yining's palm landed heavily on Siqi's face. Her chest heaved up and down as she panted angrily. Who do you think you are? How could someone like you be on the same level as my husband? That's an insult. Are you even a man? Despicable. Let me tell you, a good woman doesn't serve a second husband. I will never submit. You can kill me or torture me as you wish. But if you want me to be your vassal and drag out an ignoble existence, I'm sorry, but I can't do it. The corner of Siqi's mouth cracked from the slap, and blood slowly flowed out. Her cheek hurt even more, and it swelled up in an instant. Siqi's ears were ringing from the slap. He never imagined that such a gentle beauty could be so domineering when she was angry. She even dared to slap his face. You really don't want to live anymore. Siqi spat out the bloody foam in her mouth. Qin Yining sneered. I've already said that I'm not afraid of death. You can kill me and fulfill my wish. Siqi pursed her lips and glared angrily at Qin Yining. The most difficult person to deal with was someone like her, who wasn't afraid of anything and didn't want anything. She had no desires and was slippery, so he couldn't use any of his methods of coercion or enticement. He couldn't get hold of her weakness, which meant that he couldn't threaten her. As for enticement, he couldn't think of anything else that could move her. As for life and death, she didn't seem to be afraid at all. She didn't care about being killed at all. Instead, she cared about whether or not she would be a burden to Pang Zhishi. She was such an affectionate beauty, but her feelings weren't for him. Just looking at her made one's heart feel stifled. However, Qin Yining should be very concerned about whether or not Pang Zhishi would come to save her, right? Siqi thought about Qin Yining's reaction. A woman who had invested a lot in her relationship would naturally want to receive an equal return. If Pang Zhishi didn't come to save her, or if it was just a formality, she would probably be sad, right? Although Qin Yining didn't say it, Siqi could feel Qin Yining's feelings. Women were such emotional creatures. Anari was like this, and Qin Yining was also like this. Siqi touched the corner of his mouth with the tip of his tongue and tasted blood. He spat out a mouthful of blood and turned to leave angrily. Qin Yining watched coldly as he left. Only then did she relax her tightly clenched fists and fall onto the bed. She had finally survived this ordeal. She rubbed her slightly swollen forehead. Her face was a little pale from the double torture of physical and mental fatigue. Cheen Ening lay down again and even covered herself with the blanket. She was now in Tayton territory. Anari was a brainless madman, and Sichin was also a scum who was used to acting. They could barge in at any time. Cheen Ening felt that she could rest. She still needed to rest well. If she rested well, she would be able to deal with any unexpected situations at any time. Cheen Ening was very alert in her sleep. However, even if it was only a light sleep, it was still better than the previous period of wandering in the desert. The next morning, the maid who had helped her wash up and change her clothes yesterday came again. She helped her with her makeup and smiled as she spoke to her in Tayton. Cheen Ening didn't understand her words and looked at her in confusion. Chapter 475. Cheen Ening didn't want to go at first, but she thought that this was a rare opportunity to go out and explore the terrain. Regardless of whether she had to escape or not, she had to familiarize herself with the surroundings. The maid lifted the curtain and respectfully helped Cheen Ening out. Outside the tent was a lush green grassland. White tents with round roofs were arranged in a picturesque manner, and colorful flags fluttered in the wind. 500 steps away, many commoners gathered and shouted. There was a group of men and women riding horses in the middle of the field. They held the reins and bent over the horses. They exerted strength in their legs and raised their buttocks slightly, allowing the horses to gallop on the field like an arrow released from a bow. Every time they passed by the crowd, there would be cheers. Anari, who was dressed in red riding attire and riding a white horse, cheered the loudest. Good, good. The Khan is mighty. The Khan is a hero among women. The Khan is the most outstanding woman in Tayton. The crowd was excited and cheered. Accompanied by the sound of the horses' hooves, everyone felt a burst of joy from the bottom of their hearts. Even Cheen Ening, who had been kidnapped as a hostage, couldn't help but feel a little better when she saw this scene. The maid pointed at the horse track and whispered something. She looked at Cheen Ening with smiling eyes, as if she was waiting for her answer. Cheen Ening finally understood. The maid wanted to invite her to watch the horse race. Cheen Ening smiled and nodded in thanks. Okay, I'll do as you say. Thank you for telling me about the commotion outside. The maid didn't quite understand Cheen Ening, but when she saw her gentle smile and beautiful face, she couldn't help but blush. Her eyes sparkled as she said something. Then she pointed at the horse track and pulled Cheen Ening in that direction. Cheen Ening looked around and made sure that although there were people following her after she walked out of the tent, no one stopped her. Naturally, this was not a decision that a mere maid could make. Sichin must have given her the right to do as she pleased. How confident was this man? Wasn't he afraid that she would escape halfway? Cheen Ening followed the maid's footsteps and walked slowly on the green grass towards the horse track. His breath was filled with the fragrance of grass and the faint smell of livestock. The air here didn't smell bad at all. Instead, it made people feel relaxed. Even the sky and the white clouds seemed especially high up here. As Cheen Ening came closer, many of the tall men watching the fight outside noticed her. Although she was considered tall among the women in Jiangnan, her height was only average when it came to Tayton. However, even though she was of the same height, her figure was more delicate than most Tayton women. The most important thing was that she had learned the etiquette of the way she walked, which made her look different from the simple Tayton women they usually saw. She seemed to exude a sense of nobility from her bones, not to mention that she also had a beautiful face that was difficult to describe. The men on the periphery could not help but stare at her with infatuation and spread to the sides. Gradually, more and more people saw her, and whether men or women, they could not help but stare at her with infatuation. Moses parted the sea for her. Even the cheers and shouts that had been incessantly ringing out died down in an instant. Cheen Ening felt a little uncomfortable being stared at like this. After all, whether it was in Dian or Dezhou, for the past 2 years, she had always worn a veiled hat when she went out to meet outsiders. Although she had to show her face when she was a child, no one stared at her like this at that time. Moreover, the Tayton herdsmen were simple and honest. They liked what they liked and disliked what they hated. They did not restrain their gazes at her, and it made her feel uncomfortable all over. However, even though she felt uncomfortable, Qin Yining could not show her fear. She expressionlessly walked all the way to the front of the field. Through the wooden fence, she looked at the horses running in circles in the field. She pretended to be watching the horse race seriously, but she secretly looked further away to observe the surrounding terrain. Inari very happily enjoyed the praise and cheers of her subjects. Listening to the worship and praise, she felt great satisfaction in her heart. She could not help but work harder to show off her riding skills to win more praise. She also wanted people to know that although she was the only female Khan in the Titan for decades, she was also a heroine who was not inferior to men, who knew that the cheers that originally made her blood boil suddenly weakened for some reason. Inari was a little puzzled and a little unhappy. She urged her horse to gallop, and when she came to the crowd, she showed a confident smile, but she saw a beautiful figure in the crowd that did not fit in with the other herdsmen. Inari frowned unhappily and quickly stopped the white horse. The horse was suddenly stopped, and it neighed, raised its head high, and stomped a few times on the ground uneasily. Inari sat on the horse and looked down at Qin Yining. She raised her eyebrows and raised her chin. Say, who allowed you to come out? Ben Khan did not allow an ugly person like you to walk around in the camp. Qin Yining heard this and only smiled faintly, saying, no one stopped me, and I don't have the strength to truss a chicken, so I can't escape from your camp. I heard that the Titan are the most hospitable people. The Khan shouldn't go against the customs passed down from your ancestors, right? Inari was speechless. She frowned unhappily and sneered. Who doesn't know that you have a sharp tongue, and you are the best at absolving yourself of any crime? You're just relying on your beauty to get people to make things easy for you and go around seducing other men. Qin Yining knitted her brows tightly. They were both women, but this person dared to say such vicious words to her, who was also a woman, in front of so many people. The most important thing was that she did not have any evidence, and it was all based on her guess. It could be seen that this Khan had been pampered since he was young. After getting married, it had always been like this. And such a straightforward person had an extremely complicated son-in-law. Qin Yining did not want to meddle in other people's business, and there was no need to remind her enemy. She only knew that she could not lose her composure and become a joke. The Khan is so young and beautiful. Why would you say such vicious words? I always thought that only women who lack confidence would be suspicious of their husbands. Moreover, I'm a married woman, and my husband is a great hero who shakes the world. When I was in my boudoir, I was familiar with women's teachings, women's precepts, and legend of a fierce woman. I understand the principle that a good woman does not serve a second husband. I will never do such a thing that would disgrace my ancestors. If the Khan wants to make up a crime to accuse me of, it would be best to find a decent one. Although Qin Yining's words did not have a single dirty word, but she had ridiculed Inari's knowledge and character. The herdsmen around them listened and whispered to each other, and many people were secretly discussing what kind of person Qin Yining was. There were also some who did not know who she was, and they were also asking around. Chapter 476. Qin Yining smiled. Her smile was so bright that it took one's breath away. Khan really knows how to joke. To convince others, you need to have substance and reason. If you can't argue, it can only mean that you don't have reason or your thoughts are unclear. Khan, don't belittle all Titan women. Besides, it's traditional for women in Dezhou to follow etiquette and etiquette. This is because of the environment in which they grew up. Just like how Titan women follow their tribes to seek survival from a young age and learn many praiseworthy skills, women who are able to live dutifully in this world are not inferior to anyone else. It's just that different environments create different lives and specializations. Khan is a heroine who doesn't lose out to men, but you shouldn't belittle yourself. Qin Yining's reasoning was so strong that Nari's brain couldn't process it. She could only stare at her annoying face, wishing that she could use a knife to cut her face a few times to vent her anger. In front of her subjects, she was a kidnapped hostage, yet she dared to provoke her like this. Inari coldly reprimanded. Don't show off your little bit of knowledge. Ben-Khan is naturally a heroine who doesn't lose out to men. Unlike you, you're just a daughter flower hiding behind a man. If you really have some ability, then show it to Ben-Khan. Won't that be enough to convince him? Right now, you're just talking nonsense. What's so great about that? Qin Yining smiled and said, Then Khan, tell me, as the legitimate daughter of a minister of the imperial court, as a princess consort, what ability should I show you? You. If you have the ability, then don't show off in front of your father and man. How about we have a fair competition? Inari was determined to make things difficult for Qin Yining. She looked around and then raised her whip. Let's compete in horsemanship. Qin Yining raised her eyebrows. She turned her eyes and tactfully refused. Khan is skilled in horsemanship. How can I be a match for Khan? Let's not compete. Qin Yining's voice was soft and gentle, revealing the unique gentleness of a southern woman. Some of the herdsmen around them could understand a Zhou's language, so they passed on the information to the people around them. Everyone looked at the beautiful woman and felt that her words were very sincere. The Khan grew up on horseback since he was a child. How could a rich young lady from the Zhou compare to him? They had heard that there were many women from official families in the Zhou who had to bind their feet until they were crippled. They even said that they were beautiful. How could a woman who couldn't even stand properly know how to ride horse? With this thought in mind, some honest herdsmen curiously looked at Qin Yining's feet. However, the robe covered his feet and they couldn't see clearly. Inari smirked and mocked. That's why I said you're just an embroidered pillow who only knows how to talk. If you don't want to compete, then so be it. I'll just treat you to Zhou women as people who only have looks. If you're an ordinary woman who doesn't know how to ride a horse, then I'll let it go. I didn't expect Ji Panan's family to raise such a daughter who doesn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Inari shook her head as she said this, as if she was very sorry. I really feel sorry for Ji Panan. His reputation is going to be ruined by you. Everyone could finally see it now. The Khan hated this woman from the Zhou from the bottom of his heart. The reason might be that this beautiful woman had something to do with the Khan's son-in-law. Some of the married women couldn't stand seeing their men having anything to do with young and beautiful women. Therefore, they could understand why Inari refused to let go of Qin Yining. They all spoke out to support her, saying that if Qin Yining didn't dare to accept the challenge, then she would lose the face of all the women in Zhou. Qin Yining didn't want to compete at first. In other people's territory, no matter if she won or lost, the other party would find an excuse to slander her. Moreover, she could feel that after being injured and losing blood again, and after the torment in the desert, her body was not as good as before. She didn't have the strength she used to have, but she was never a person who would easily back down. Inari's clamor successfully evoked her courage. She would rather lose than avoid the challenge. Otherwise, she wouldn't have the face to say that she was Ji Panan's daughter and Prince Zhongshuan's wife. Okay. Qin Yining took a few steps forward and went around to Inari through a gap in the wooden fence. She said, But I don't have a horse. Inari raised her hand, and one of the men who had stopped racing led a red horse over. The horse was tall and strong, with a long mane. It looked like a wild horse. Some of the people in the tribe who recognized the horse began to worry for Qin Yining. This horse was originally a wild horse, but because it was injured and was rescued by them, they kept it by their side. Once its injuries were healed, they wanted to tame this horse, but even the man with the best horsemanship in the tribe took 3 months to barely make this horse bow its head to him. Moreover, this horse was very stubborn. After recognizing the man as its master, it was only willing to let him ride it alone, and no one else could touch it. Inari had seen the horse before the race, so of course she knew how wild it was. She smiled mockingly. Then, I'll give you this one. The man led the horse over and threw the reins and whipped to Qin Yining. Qin Yining slowly walked towards the red horse under the watchful eyes of the onlookers. Princess, you have to be careful. Lu Heng and Si Qin had unknowingly arrived at the side. Seeing Qin Yining approaching the red horse, Lu Heng said nervously, If you can't do it, just admit defeat. Where there's life, there's hope. There's no need to hurt yourself because of a moment of anger. Lu Heng's handsome and noble face was filled with genuine worry. He had been watching for a long time, but as captives, they had to listen to someone else no matter what. The people around him had all died, so there was nothing he could do about this situation. Qin Yining was the woman he liked, and they were both from Dezhou. At this time, he couldn't help but remind her. Qin Yining turned around and nodded at Lu Heng with a smile, but she didn't agree in her heart. Admit defeat? She had never admitted defeat since she was born. When she was young in the mountains, when she encountered wild beasts, especially wolves, as long as she showed fear once, she would have been eaten until not even her bones were left. When facing wild beasts, the best way was to be even more ferocious than them. Qin Yining held the whip in one hand and the reins in the other. The red horse snorted unhappily, stomped its hooves, and shook its strong neck in dissatisfaction, resisting Qin Yining's hand that was holding the reins. However, Qin Yining's fighting spirit had been completely ignited at this time. She had long forgotten about the discomfort in her body. Her eyes were as bright as two clusters of flames. She tightly held the reins in her hands and pulled hard. Then, she nimbly pulled the saddle and mounted the horse. The red horse let out a long neigh, then immediately flipped its body and kicked its hind hooves hard, trying to throw Qin Yining off. The onlookers exclaimed. Some of the timid women and children had already covered their eyes in fear. Chapter 477. The sky was blue, the clouds were white, the grass was green, the horse was red, and the beauty was wearing a tartan robe with narrow sleeves. Her hair was flying in the wind. Her skin was white as snow. Her eyes were shining under her slender eyebrows, and her lips were pursed stubbornly as she trained the horse seriously. All of these formed a very impactful picture in the eyes of all the onlookers. It could no longer be described as beautiful or ugly. What was moving and shocking was the stubbornness and unyielding in her bones. Although she was too delicate compared with the wild horse, the momentum they exuded when they fought was evenly matched. Lu Heng had already been mesmerized by the scene. Qin also narrowed her eyes slightly and looked amazed. Inari bit her lower lip. She didn't expect that this vixen could seduce people just by training a horse. Now, she just wanted this vixen to fall and be trampled by the wild horse until her bones and tendons were broken. But Inari's hope was doomed to fail. Qin Yining held the reins tightly, hugged the saddle, and bent down firmly on the horse's back with her legs clamped. She was not afraid of the red horse's toughness at all. She had dealt with wild horses before and had ridden the leading horse of a herd. Although the leading horse did not want to go with her when they parted, she had some love and respect for these wild and spiritual animals. Naturally, she had a way to tame them. Qin Yining was determined not to admit defeat, but the wild horse was also stubborn. When the woman and the horse were in a deadlock, the red horse saw that it could not get rid of her, so it neighed and ran wildly with her. Qin Yining was caught off guard by the horse, which made the onlookers exclaim. However, she reacted quickly and immediately straightened her posture. She simply accompanied the wild horse to run around in a circle as fast as lightning. She bent down, focused on stabilizing herself, and tried to control the horse. Her long hair flew behind her head. In the blink of an eye, she ran a lap around the wooden fence. Wherever she went, there was a gust of wind. The people around could not see her expression clearly, and she ran away in the blink of an eye. Her speed was much faster than when Inari was racing with others. After all, those men were just accompanying the Khan in the horse race. It didn't matter if they won or lost. They just wanted to make the Khan happy. But now, Qin Yining was training the horse. The most important thing was to let the horse run smoothly. Comparing the two, it went without saying which one was more realistic and whose riding skills were more exquisite. In fact, when Inari chose a wild horse for Qin Yining, hoping that she would fall to her death, Inari had already lost in horsemanship. Inari gripped the horsewhip in her hand tightly. She gritted her teeth as she looked at the person who had run several laps in front of her. Qin Yining, on the other hand, felt that the red horse had given in. Not only did it slow down, but it was also willing to listen to her commands. After riding the red horse for more than 10 laps, Qin Yining tried to stop it in front of the crowd. The red horse actually stopped with a long neigh. The crowd exclaimed in surprise. Many of the young men looked at Qin Yining with eyes full of worship and admiration. Qin Yining sat on the horse and smiled at Nari. "Khan, we can compete now." What was there to compete with? He had started by training horses and had already displayed his superb horsemanship skills to the fullest. It was breathtaking. If they were to compete at this time, wouldn't it be embarrassing if they lost? Anari snorted and raised her chin. "I'm too lazy to compete with you." She walked towards Si Qin. Qin Yining blinked. Her smile was very gentle, as if she was indulging an ignorant child. "All right, then let's not compete." She nimbly dismounted from the horse and handed the reins back to the man who had led the horse to her, who knew that the horse would snort and nudge Qin Yining's face with its big head. It even used its big face to rub against Qin Yining's neck. Its affectionate behavior made it hard to imagine that this coquettish fellow was the tyrant who had wanted to throw people to their deaths. The man was a straightforward person. He laughed when he saw this. He spoke into Zhou's broken accent. "Horse mud." Qin Yining smiled and said, "Thank you for lending it to me just now." No. Horse, Western Wasteland mud. Mud. Yining horse belongs to mud." De Zhou, who was more talkative, enthusiastically helped Qin Yining translate. "Miss, Sangda means that this horse is yours. You tamed it, and it likes you, so the horse should belong to you." Qin Yining hurriedly said, "You can't do that. This horse was originally lent to me." "Miss, you don't know. This horse was originally picked up by Sangda. He tamed it for 3 months before the horse agreed to let him ride it. However, you tamed it in just a moment. We people of the grassland also pay attention to fate. Miss, you and this horse are clearly more fated." The other herdsmen around them also smiled and nodded. Their simple smiles were very sincere, as if everyone had forgotten how Anari had made things difficult for her. This was the cuteness of the common people. They were simple and kind. They would not use bad thoughts to judge others. They were also straightforward and would not go against the traditions of their tribe. Qin Yining really wanted to take it. She definitely would not stay here forever. She could not become a tool for others to restrict her father and Pang Shao. Therefore, rather than waiting for death, it was better to take the initiative to attack. Therefore, with a horse, the success rate of escaping would be much higher. However, as a prisoner, even if she took the horse now, Anari would not be able to take it away because of his face. Later on, he would use all kinds of methods to prevent her from owning the horse. Anari was the Khan. Of course, he could not directly take away her things. Therefore, the best way was to let the horse die. It was useless for her to want a dead horse. Thinking of this, Qin Yining smiled and said, "I have been invited here by the Khan. Everything will be according to the Khan's arrangements. Moreover, I do not have any capable people by my side. If the Khan agrees to help take care of this horse, I will accept your kindness." After saying this, she turned to look at Nari. Anari almost spat on her face. Qin Yining was shamelessly checkmating her. If she agreed, wouldn't she be responsible for the horse's life and death? Why would she help Qin Yining take care of the horse? Anari sneered and said, "You are just a prisoner. What qualifications do you have to make such a request?" Her words caused the entire crowd to fall silent. Qin Yining faintly smiled and nodded. "The Khan is right. I am very touched that the Khan is willing to lower himself to race horses with a prisoner like me." After saying this, Qin Yining walked back to her tent. She only left the crowd to see her back. Anari looked at her back and clenched her teeth so hard that they almost bled. When she turned her head, she saw that Si Qin was also staring at Qin Yining's back. That was the deep gaze of a man looking at a woman with a desire to plunder. It made Anari's heart skip a beat. Sure enough, her worries were not unfounded. She was a vixen. Anari clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles cracked. Chapter 478. As soon as Qin Yining returned to the tent, she collapsed onto the couch in exhaustion. She closed her eyes and rested for a while. Then she got up and took a hair tie to tie her long hair into a loose bundle. She then lay down to rest. The maid arranged for her saw that she had fallen asleep, so she didn't disturb her and quietly left. Who knew that as soon as she lifted the curtain of the tent, she would see Si-Chin standing at the door with his hands behind his back. She didn't know when he had arrived. When a maid saw that it was the prince consort, she was stunned for a moment before bowing in greeting. Just as she was about to open her mouth to greet him, Si-Chin made a shushing gesture and waved his hand, indicating for her to leave. When a maid saw this, her heart skipped a beat. She thought about how the Khan had made things difficult for the person in the room today, and then observed the prince consort's expression. She felt that she had discovered something incredible. This person was so beautiful that even she couldn't help but take a few more glances at her. She had to carefully protect her, so how could she be seen in a man's eyes? If the prince consort really had any thoughts, she might be the first to lose her little life. The maid lowered her head and shrunk her shoulders as she left. As she walked, she wondered if she should tell the Khan about this. She blinked and rejected this idea. Who didn't know that the Khan was infatuated with the prince consort? The Khan also wanted to be strong. If the prince consort took a fancy to another woman and the maid found out, he might immediately kill her. Even if the Khan didn't kill her, the prince consort wouldn't let her off if he found out that she had told on him. Right now, she could only pray that the Khan didn't know about this. If this matter was exposed and the Khan asked her, it would be best to find a good excuse. When a maid thought of this, she almost cried. In the tent, Si-Chin slowly walked over to Chin Ening's bed. He lowered his head to look at her sleeping face and didn't move for a long time. This wasn't the first time he had been uncontrollably attracted to her. Si-Chin had always been a person with great self-control. He always knew what he wanted and how to get what he wanted. But now that he saw Chin Ening, he suddenly had a strong desire to obtain this woman. It wasn't that he hadn't seen beautiful women before, but it was his first time seeing a woman as beautiful as her. She was different from all the other women in Tayton. She was like a spring, soft and firm. Her every movement was graceful, and her every frown and smile were charming. Such a woman, even if she did nothing but stay by his side, just looking at her would make him feel good. Why did this person appear so late? It seemed that Tian Jizi was right. His life had been wasted since he was born. Everything he wanted would not be placed right in front of him. He would have to work hard to obtain them. Si-Chin pursed his lips and sat on the edge of the bed. He knew that Chin Ening was very sensitive, so he chose to come when Chin Ening was tired. He also restrained his aura and reduced his presence so that he wouldn't stare at her all the time. Si-Chin looked at her delicate face and felt a strong urge to touch her. He reached out and gently touched her face with his right index and middle finger. Chin Ening seemed to feel something and suddenly opened her eyes. Seeing the hand in front of her, she hurriedly slapped his hand away. With a crisp slap, Si-Chin frowned and retracted his hand. Chin Ening jumped up. Although her vision turned dark, she didn't show it on her face. Her sharp eyes stared fiercely at Si-Chin. She didn't sleep well and was in the enemy's camp. No matter how tired she was, she had to force herself to stay awake. If it weren't for the fact that she had wasted so much energy training the horse, she wouldn't have waited for Si-Chin to reach out to touch her. Si-Chin slowly stood up and looked straight into her guarded eyes. He rubbed his fingers and slowly walked forward. I suddenly have a very good suggestion. None of your suggestions are good to me. Chin Ening looked at him coldly. I advise you, Prince Consort, to cherish your current life. Although your Khan is not a very intelligent woman, she is a woman who treats you with sincerity and sincerity. If you let her down, aren't you afraid of retribution? Retribution? Si-Chin seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. Yes, you're right. Look at your man. He's killed countless people, and now his retribution is that his woman has fallen into my hands. Si-Chin's voice suddenly rose. His low and angry voice made people's hearts tremble. Chin Ening's heart couldn't help but skip a beat, but she wasn't afraid at all. She coldly looked back at him. In the dimly lit tent, her entire body was half hidden in the shadows. Light surrounded her, illuminating her messy hair with a faint golden glow. Her eyes were especially bright, reminding Si-Chin of packs of wolves on the grasslands. He couldn't help but stare at her in a daze. He reached out and muttered, "Woman, with such looks, why do you have such eyes? What are you doing?" An angry roar came from the front door, interrupting Sichin's muttering. Henri angrily strode over and pulled on Sichin's collar, causing him to take 2 steps back. She then fiercely flung his hand. "Didn't you say that you had something important to do? Your important matter is to come to this vixen's tent?" Sichin looked at Inari's flushed face and her eyes that were burning with anger. It took a lot of effort for him to suppress the disappointment in his heart. "Khan, you've misunderstood." "Misunderstood? You're a man and a woman alone in a tent, and you're not even willing to have anyone by your side. This vixen is also like this. If you say you're not moved at all, who would believe you?" Inari roared angrily. Sichin helplessly said, "Khan, you're really thinking too much. I'm here to ask her about the Prince Zhongshan. Although she won't tell us the truth, she can at least provide us with some clues, can't she? If you don't trust her, then don't you trust me? What kind of person do you think I am?" Inari heard this and looked back at Qin Yining suspiciously. She really did trust Sichin. She had known Sichin for so many years, and she had never seen him be moved by any other woman. He had always been obedient to her. Inari had always been very confident in herself. She was of noble status, and her riding and shooting skills were not inferior to anyone. She was also the female Khan that the Tatan trusted. Anyone who knew her only had admiration and respect for her. Sichin should have treated her as his only master, and he had always done so. This made Inari more and more like to rely on him. But now, he had actually taken the initiative to approach a beautiful woman. This made Inari want to tear Qin Yining into pieces. Inari had always loved Sichin. Although she could yell at Sichin when she was angry, she could not do anything to her own husband. Not only could she not bear to do it, but she had also worked hard to establish Sichin's prestige. If they were not united, outsiders would take advantage of them. Chapter 479. Thanks to the commotion caused by Inari, Qin Yining finally had a day of peace. Perhaps Sichin was being watched so tightly that he didn't have a chance to get close to her. This allowed her to relax her tense nerves. The next morning, before the sun had even risen and Qin Yining had yet to get up, the tent's curtains were lifted. The autumn wind in the wee hours mercilessly entered the tent. Qin Yining quivered and opened her eyes. She sat up and looked at the door cautiously. It was a middle-aged woman with a stocky figure. She wore an indigo robe with narrow sleeves and a black waistcoat. Her hair was neatly tied up behind her head. When she saw Qin Yining, her face was filled with obvious disdain. She mocked her into Zhou's dialect. "It seems like you're sleeping well. The Khan ordered me to watch over you from today onwards. The Khan and the Prince Consort have already gotten up and are preparing to depart. You're a prisoner, yet you're still sleeping. Get up and work." Qin Yining immediately understood. It must be that Inari couldn't bear to see her living so comfortably and had arranged for an old mama to torture her. As for the maidservants who used to carefully serve her with sparkling eyes, she probably wouldn't have them anymore. Qin Yining didn't say anything. She got up and tidied herself up. She washed her face with cold water and casually wiped her hair. She combed her hair into a simple bun and put on the red agate hat. She was all alone and didn't have any luggage. She only had some medicine that she needed to take. She organized it into a small bundle. "Let's go." Qin Yining finished her preparations. She turned around and stepped on the old mama's foot and left. The old mama didn't expect Qin Yining to be so skilled in taking care of her. She didn't haggle or drag her feet. She was completely different from the foxy woman who dared to seduce the prince consort in order to live a good life. She couldn't keep up with her train of thought, but she still remembered the Khan's orders. She strode forward and pushed Qin Yining from behind. "Hurry up and go. Don't dawdle. Who do you think you are? You're just a captive. How dare you be so arrogant in front of the Khan?" Qin Yining staggered and almost fell to the ground. After she steadied herself, she turned around angrily and raised her hand to slap the nanny. "Who do you think you are? How dare you behave atrociously in front of this king's consort?" The old mammy spun in a circle and fell to the ground dizzily. She covered her face in disbelief and looked up at her. You dare to hit me. You're the slave, and I'm the master. You offended me, so why can't I beat you? I'm a guest invited by your prince consort. You, a servant, dare to be so impudent. Could it be that there is no need to discuss the matter between your Tayton and Dezhou? Qin Yining's voice was not loud or fast, but it was very intimidating. Everyone outside the tent, who was busy preparing for the journey, looked over. When they saw that the nanny had tried to teach Qin Yining a lesson, but was instead taught a lesson by Qin Yining, they all whispered and pointed at each other. Qin Yining reprimanded, "Either you stay and serve me well, or you scram back and get someone who understands the rules. I heard that the Tayton are the most hospitable and reasonable people. Such a good people is completely dragged down by someone like you who doesn't know the rules and uses your power to bully others." Some of the people at the side who understood Dezhou's language felt that Qin Yining was too domineering, while others felt that the old mammy was too domineering and angered the guest. Everyone's discussion became even louder. At this time, Inari, who was wearing a red cloak, quickly walked over with a horsewhip in her hand. When she saw that the person she had arranged was sitting on the ground with a swollen face, she was immediately furious. "You've got guts. How dare you be so impudent in Ben Khan's territory?" "Khan," Qin Yining said politely, "this concubine is a woman and doesn't know much. But even so, this concubine knows how to treat a guest. Khan is a woman who is knowledgeable, reasonable, and broad-minded. If you ask people of this level to come out and do things for you, they will not only be insensible, but also tarnish Khan's reputation. Wouldn't that be wronging Khan? If you know, it's the actions of your evil servants. If you don't know, you will think that Khan specially ordered them to abuse a weak guest." Looking at the increasingly swollen handprint on the mammy's face, Inari was so angry that her face turned pale. "You are so thick-skinned. You hit her face like this, and you still have the nerve to say that you are weak." Qin Yining looked at the whip in Inari's hand and smiled. "Khan, I respect you as a heroine. Although I was forcefully invited by your country's son-in-law to be a guest, I am still Dezhou's Prince Zhongshuan's wife and the daughter of the Minister of Rights. You can kill me, but you can't humiliate me. I'm a person with no patience and a bad temper. And the most important thing is that I am easily impulsive. If your people try to be disrespectful to me again, then I will end all troubles and won't have to endure your vexation anymore. When the time comes, I can't guarantee whether or not you will be able to negotiate. You actually dare to threaten Ben Khan. Let me tell you, my Tayton army has many generals and soldiers, as well as sufficient provisions. If we want to flatten Dezhou, where the entire country is filled with cowards, it will be as easy as blowing off dust. You can die, but we won't talk about conditions. This Khan will directly lead the warriors to kill you, and not leave a single armor behind." Inari raised her arms as she spoke. The attendants on the side also shouted in agreement. Qin Yining heard this and felt a wave of worry in her heart. She was now certain that there was something wrong between Si Qin and Inari. Inari's fearless appearance showed that she really didn't care about fighting a war. In fact, she seemed to want to fight a war. As for Dezhou, Pang Zhao's situation was already very awkward. If anything happened to her, with Pang Zhao's personality, she would definitely lead the army to avenge her. At that time, not to mention whether your majesty would be willing to relinquish military power, even the war itself would cause great suffering to the people. Qin Yining's mind was racing, but she didn't back down at all. The Khan has many people and a loud voice. "I won't compete with you on this. Didn't you say that you wanted to return to the capital? Then I'll go to the carriage first." Qin Yining nodded and walked straight to a handcart. Lu Heng had already been placed in the carriage. When he saw Qin Yining approaching, he smiled and moved inwards to make room for her. Lu Heng whispered, "Don't provoke them, lest they suffer physical pain. I think they kidnapped the two of us for more than just ransom." "You can tell too?" Qin Yining also whispered. The two of them had a tacit understanding. It seemed that with Lu Heng's intelligence, he had already grasped some of the situation. Inari saw that Qin Yining had hooked up with Lu Heng as soon as she got on the carriage. and she was even more suspicious of her character. With a sullen face, she ordered them to set off. They weren't allowed to rest along the way. After spending an entire day, they finally entered the gates of the Taytan capital, Dadu, after dark. Chapter 480. Most of the cities were brightly lit at night. The Taytan city did not seem to have a curfew. The streets were still bustling with activity. Men and women wearing Taytan clothing walked on the streets. The tea houses and restaurants were open for business. One could see the people inside through the open doors and windows. When the Khan's carriage arrived, the guards at the city gate immediately saluted. The commoners on the streets also retreated to the sides and saluted. They all greeted the Khan in Taytan. Qin Yining and Lu Heng sat on the handcart and looked at the lively crowd. They could not help but look at each other. In Dezhou, Li Qitian would never dare to appear in front of the commoners like this. This was because such a lively scene was the most suitable place for an assassination. It seemed that Inari was very close to the commoners. She would do more to get closer to the commoners. The simple enthusiasm of the commoners warmed the hearts of outsiders. Lu Heng whispered in Qin Yining's ear, "Do you think so too?" He did not need to finish speaking. Qin Yining already knew what he wanted to say. He nodded and said, "The skilled are bold." Inari had some skills. She also had the Taytan god of war, Si Qin, to protect her. Her guard were also very responsible. With her flamboyant and showy personality, it would be strange if she hid carefully. The carriage went all the way to the majestic Taytan imperial palace. Unexpectedly, just as they turned the corner, two ragged youths suddenly ran out from the cheering crowd and knelt on the ground. Inari raised her hand and stopped the carriage. The surrounding commoners also looked over curiously. Inari sneered, "What are you doing? I let you live last time, and now you want to die again? Khan, I beg you to let go of Abu and Ag. I beg you to let go of Abu and Ag. I let you live, and you dare to come again? Abu and Ag have committed a serious crime. They should be slaves to atone for their crimes. So are your clansmen." "No. Our Minuo tribe was already a subject when Khan became the regent, but Khan refused to let our tribesmen go. Our tribe originally had more than 20,000 people, but now Khan has slaughtered less than 4,000, leaving only the old, the weak, the women, and the children. I, Abu, and Erji have already surrendered. Why does Khan still want to kill us all?" "Serves you right." Inari immediately began to criticize the Minuo tribe for obstructing her path to the throne. The scene was silent, and only Inari and the two teenagers could be heard arguing more and more fiercely. They used Taytan, Qin Yining. She didn't understand, but she realized that Lu Heng, who was beside her, seemed to understand. "You know Taytan?" Qin Yining asked in a low voice. Lu Heng looked into her bright eyes and nodded with a smile. He then whispered into her ear the content of their argument. Qin Yining fell into deep thought. Taytan was different from Dezhou. Most of their people lived a difficult life as nomads. On the surface, they were unified under the Khan, but in reality, the country was divided into many tribes. The Minuo tribe originally had 20,000 people, which was already considered a large tribe in Taytan. But because of the power struggle, Inari reduced their numbers to 4,000, the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled. Qin Yining also understood that political struggle was always a matter of life and death. Whoever showed mercy would pay with their lives. But she still had a soft spot in her heart. Seeing that Honoree's argument was getting fiercer and fiercer, and that she was already rushing towards the two half-grown children with the horsewhip in her hand, she couldn't help but ask, "Khan, don't tell me you are deliberately putting on a show here to show me, a foreign guest, how you uphold the tradition of hospitality?" As soon as Qin Yining spoke, everyone's eyes fell on her. She was speaking Dezhou's language, so most of the onlookers couldn't understand. But Inari could understand. She turned around angrily and met Qin Yining's indifferent and slightly mocking gaze. She scolded, "What do you mean? What I meant was literally what I said. The Khan speaks Dezhou's language very well, so he should understand." Inari didn't want to whip the two teenagers anymore. She turned around and angrily walked toward Qin Yining. Lu Heng worriedly shielded Qin Yining behind him and said in Taitan, "The princess is only thinking of the Khan. Killing people is just a matter of nodding your head. The Khan has already killed so many of their people and captured their parents. Why bother beating 2 children in front of everyone?" Although Qin Yining was grateful for Lu Heng's protection, she didn't want to rely on others to help her solve the problem she caused herself. She continued in Dezhou's language, "The Khan is a hero, the ruler of country. You have many soldiers and generals under your command, and there are so many experts surrounding you. You don't even want to let go of a tribe that has already submitted to you, and you even want to kill 2 filial and innocent children. Aren't you afraid that people will be disappointed if they see you like this?" Inari was furious and fiercely swung her whip. "Who do you think you are? How dare you point fingers in front of Ben Khan?" The Minuo tribe resisted and lost, so they are all Ben Khan's slaves. Ben Khan could do whatever he wants with them. Do you think he needs to explain himself to you? Yes, you can do whatever you want." Qin Yining waved her hand and looked like she was dealing with an unreasonable child. She sighed and said, "But isn't the Khan afraid that the teeth will feel cold when the lips are gone, and the fox will mourn when the rabbit dies? Look at your subjects. Are you sure that killing the weak is the only way you can show your majesty as the ruler of country?" "Khan, I always thought you were a heroine with means and shrewdness. Now it seems that you're just an upstart who gets carried away by the joy of power." "What did you say? Who are you calling an upstart? Aren't you Khan? A person who is truly in power will not show off just because he has a little bit of power in his hands. He will use his power to show off his means in front of those innocent people. You are already the Khan. Why are you in such a hurry to show off? You look as ugly as an upstart who doesn't have much money, but still wears a 3-kilogram gold hairpin to show off in the streets. This will only lower your image. I can't see the bravery you want to show at all." These words were like knives that pierced Inari's heart. She was so embarrassed that her face turned red. She was just about to raise her whip when she saw that the people around her were looking at her quietly. Qin Yining's words just now hovered in her mind again. If she really lashed out now, it would be to affirm that Qin Yining's words were correct. At this moment, the 2 pleading youths were like 2 nimble loaches. They turned around and plunged into the crowd and ran far away. The guards didn't have time to react. They cried out in alarm and chased after them. Inari looked back and saw that they had run far away. The surrounding people were still being chased away by the guards. She became even more angry. Qin Yining shook his head and said, "Seeing that the Khan has treated us for free, I will give you a sentence. The ruler is the boat. The commoners are the water. The water carries the boat. The water capsizes the boat. If the ruler thinks of danger, then how can danger not come? When the Khan is free, you can read Sun Tzu. I believe that the parts that you don't understand, the prince consort will definitely understand and be willing to explain it to you." Chapter 481. As soon as Qin Yining spoke, Lu Heng, who was beside her, furrowed his brows in worry. He couldn't help but tug on her sleeve. He could also tell that Si Qin was a bit off, but this was Taitan's national affairs. There was no need for an outsider to speak up, especially in front of Si Qin. Lu Heng was a bit annoyed at Qin Yining's impulsiveness, but he was more worried that she would be implicated. As expected, Si Qin stood up and walked in front of Inari. He looked at Qin Yining with a cold gaze. Qin Yining's words were not impulsive, but after careful consideration. If the Taitan rulers were united, what good would it do for Dezhou? It would be best if Inari and Si Qin were suspicious of each other, so that they would have no time to invade. Furthermore, she could tell that Si Qin was a man who placed great importance on power. If Inari continued to act foolishly, the throne would be usurped sooner or later. If Si Qin became the Taitan's ruler, the pace of their invasion to the south would increase. However, Dezhou's treasury was currently empty. How would they have the strength to resist? Pang Xiao and Jiziyu were having a hard time leading their troops in a battle. How many soldiers would be spilled on the battlefield? How many innocent people would die? Qin Yining didn't want to see a war. It would be best if Inari and Si Qin were busy fighting each other. Qin Yining looked fearlessly at Si Qin and smiled. Does Prince Consort also think that my words are reasonable? It seems that Prince Zhongshuan's consort is quite knowledgeable. Isn't there a saying in Dezhou that a woman's virtue is if she has no talent? If the consort is like this, wouldn't she be considered a deviant? Hearing Si Qin's words, Anari added, "Look at that vixen. She's definitely not someone who knows her place." When Qin Yining saw Anari's expression, she knew that her warning was in vain. When she met Anari's angry and jealous eyes, she shook her head and sighed. "Khan, you should pay attention to your own status when you speak." Only then did Anari remember that he was on the street. She was the Khan of the Tatar Empire, and so many people were watching her every move. Such a statement of jealousy would really attract criticism. Anari turned around and said, "Let's go back to the palace." The accompanying guards immediately complied and ordered them to set off. The group moved forward again, heading towards the palace. The commoners dispersed and regained their previous enthusiasm. Qin Yining returned to the handcart. Lu Hong said in a low voice, "I know what you're thinking, but you have to think about your own safety. It's best if you stay alive and return to Dezhou. You don't want to lose your life here for no reason, right?" Qin Yining knew that Lu Hong was truly concerned about her. She said in a low voice, "I know. Si Qin still wants to use me. He won't kill me for now. I feel like he's up to something. You have to be careful. Even though you're from the Lu family, you've been missing for so long. You still don't know what's going on in your family. You have to think about taking a step back when you're negotiating with them. Don't trust your family too much." Qin Yining was a person who knew how to repay kindness. Now that she and Lu Hong were in trouble together, Lu Hong was truly concerned about her. She also sincerely reminded Lu Hong. Even though it was a splash of cold water, Lu Hong still felt warm from her sincere concern. How could he not understand? The Lu family was a century-old family. Its power was intertwined and not united. He had been away for so long, and now that he was missing, the power in his family might have already been reshuffled. Even though Si Qin didn't kill him because of his status as a member of the Lu family, he still kept him alive for negotiation. However, if the Lu family had any intention of giving up on him, Si Qin definitely wouldn't let him go. Speaking of which, the two of them were in the same situation. The architecture of the Taitan Imperial Palace was completely different from that of Dezhou's Imperial Palace. The palaces here were less exquisite and more magnificent. The palace maids all bowed in unison to welcome the Khan. Anari had been suppressing his anger. Now that they were in his territory, he immediately pointed at Qin Yining and said, "Lock her up in the dungeon for Ben Khan. Arrange for people to keep an eye on her. Without my orders, no one is allowed to let her out." Yes, the Imperial Guards immediately came forward to tie her up. However, Si Qin raised his hand to stop them. "Khan, we still need to make use of these two people. The dungeon is dark and damp. If a woman gets sick or something happens to her, it will affect our plans." Anari narrowed his eyes at Si Qin. He approached him and grabbed his collar. He gritted his teeth and said, "You can't bear to part with her?" Along the way, Si Qin had already been fed up with Anari's forceful attitude. Now that she was being so unreasonable, Si Qin was even angrier. He suppressed his anger and said, "Khan, please don't speak in such an eccentric manner. We are husband and wife, not enemies. Could it be that you haven't seen or heard how I treated you all these years? I'm very clear that you care about me, and I am very touched. However, you have wronged me time and time again, and it makes me very sad." Si Qin was born gentle and refined. He had the temperament of a scholarly general. At this time, he was frowning and standing with his hands behind his back. He had an imposing manner that made people trust him. Anari had long been deeply in love with him. The two of them had supported each other until now. She admired and worshipped this man. Hearing him say this, Anari's heart skipped a beat. Thinking back to her actions, she felt somewhat regretful. However, her pride as a Khan did not allow her to lower her head. She stubbornly bit her lips and did not speak. Si Qin sighed and turned to instruct the palace maids. "Take the two guests to the side hall to rest. Arrange for people to take care of them." Yes, the palace maids obeyed and led Qin Yining and Lu Hong in opposite directions. Qin Yining glanced at the two older maids leading her. Seeing their light steps and well-trained appearance, she knew that they were skilled in martial arts. Regardless of how Si-Qin comforted Inari, Qin Yining followed behind the maids. She carefully observed the courtyards on both sides of the corridor and the tall and rugged buildings. She also memorized the surrounding scenery and routes clearly. The side hall where she was locked up was very spacious. As soon as she entered, she felt a gust of cold air hit her in the face. The floor of the hall was neatly laid with stone bricks. The stone bricks were covered with a red carpet. The windows on both sides were tightly shut. Behind the screen was a wide couch. In front of the couch was a square stove sunk into the ground. The bonfire inside was not lit. "Madam, please rest here for the time being." The maid de joie spoke very well. Her voice echoed in the spacious side hall. Qin Yining nodded. Another maid went forward to light the bonfire. Qin Yining sat down on the couch and stretched out her hands towards the bonfire to warm herself. At this time, several maids brought in a quilt and a fur mattress. Qin Yining did not refuse. She wrapped herself in the quilt and buried half of her face in it. She let out a long sigh as she warmed herself by the fire. Tayton was even more northerly than de Jo's capital. In this season, the capital of Dian was already in the season of autumn rain and cold. Here, one could already feel the knife-like northern wind. Qin Yining shivered. After warming up for a while, she curled up and lay down to rest. Chapter 482. Hunt. Qin Yining knew that this was definitely not a simple matter. Anime was full of jealousy, and he looked like he had fallen into a vinegar jar just now. Si-Qin obviously wanted to use Anime to do something. They were quarreling happily just now, and now they suddenly said that they wanted a hunt. There must be a conspiracy behind it. The maid saw Qin Yining's eyelashes fluttering, her eyes lowered in silence. Half of her small face was hidden in the soft animal skin, and the other half was hidden in the warm orange firelight. Even a woman's heart softened when she saw her beautiful appearance, let alone a man. Qin Yining's behavior of being so wary of Anna Ri and hating Qin Yining was more understandable. "Madam," the maid called out inquisitively. She obeyed Inari's orders and still had to report back. Qin Yining wanted to refuse. Her body was weak, and she was tired from the long journey. She was already at her limit. If she was still in the palace, Qin Yining would definitely relax and have a good rest. She would just laze around in bed eating, sleeping, and recuperating. She might even fall sick. But now she was only a prisoner and did not have the right to indulge herself. She also did not have the right to refuse or resist Inari's orders. It had to be said that the desperate situation forced her to be strong. In the current situation, she could only grit her teeth and continue to struggle. Otherwise, she could only stretch out her neck and become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. "Understand. Go back and tell Khan that I will be there." Seeing Qin Yining agree, the maid nodded. She took a few steps back, walked around the screen, and left the side hall. As the hall door closed with a creak, the entire hall fell into silence again. Only the crackling of the firewood could be heard from the bonfire. Qin Yining did not relax, because she could feel that although there was no one in the hall, there were at least two people secretly watching her every move. Moreover, they were watching from different directions. Thinking about it, it should be two groups of people. Because it was a woman without the strength to truss up a chicken, there was no need to send two experts. Moreover, there were layers of guards outside the hall, so there was no need to be afraid that she would try to escape. Qin Yining tightened the blanket around his body and wrapped himself into a ball. Then, he curled up next to the bonfire and lay down. At this moment, she missed her home in the capital very much. She missed Pang Xiao, her parents, the Ma clan, and the Yao clan. There was also Bing Tang and Ji Yun. He did not know if they had escaped. He didn't know if Chao Yuqing could still survive after suffering such heavy injuries. She had been separated from Pang Xiao for more than 3 months. If Pang Xiao knew that she was missing, he would be extremely worried. Qin Yining closed her eyes. However, she felt that her nose was sour and her eyes were hot. Tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. She used all her strength to restrain herself from crying. Tears made people weak, but she could not be weak now. She wanted to escape from Sichin's scheme and Inari's fear to leave the Titan alive. She could not allow herself to be weak at all. She could not allow herself to be afraid or retreat. Once she had such weak emotions, only eternal damnation would await her. Qin Yining did not sleep well that night. She was imprisoned and monitored in a place that did not provide her with any sense of security. She had to constantly be on guard to see if anyone came back. It was impossible for her to sleep peacefully. However, when she woke up early the next morning, she was still energetic and calm as usual. The maid was the same one from yesterday. Her name was Wu Yahan. Qin Yining observed that she might also be a martial artist. Because she walked silently, she always appeared behind him suddenly. However, Wu Yahan's temper was not annoying. As long as it was within her knowledge, she would bring Qin Yining around. She would also explain to her about the surrounding buildings and some Titan customs. She was also attentive when serving Qin Yining. "Madam, it's almost time." "Okay." Qin Yining took the cotton cloak from Wu Yahan and put it on. She also put on a gray rabbit fur scarf and warm boots. Wu Yahan led Qin Yining out of the palace. Outside the side door of the palace, there was already a group of guards and warriors waiting there. The guards were all wearing animal skins and had longbows in their arms. Their quivers were full of arrows and were ready to shoot. The slaves who were leading the horses and preparing the carriages were all dressed in rags. Their hair was messy and their faces were miserable. Among the slaves, there were even 7 or 8-year-old children and shriveled old men. Qin Yining frowned and followed behind Wu Yahan. Wu Yahan pointed to a group of slaves and said, "Madam, the Khan ordered you to wait here." Qin Yining understood that this was Inari's humiliation to her. However, she was originally a prisoner. Moreover, she had never felt that she was any nobler than a slave. She was born as a human. How could she be born as a lowly person? Moreover, with Inari's methods, these slaves could be ordinary herdsmen who were defeated by her tribes during her expeditions. She did not think much of it and turned to stand in the middle of the group of slaves. The slaves stood at the side with their heads down and slightly bowed. They did not dare to raise their heads to see who was standing in their group. Qin Yining's calm performance made Wu Yahan have a whole new level of respect for her. Not long after, Lu Heng, who was wearing a gray rat cloak, arrived with Inari and Sichin. As soon as he stepped out of the arched brick city gate, he saw Qin Yining standing in the middle of a group of dirty slaves. She was like a crane in a flock of chickens, happy and content. Lu Heng immediately frowned and said in a low voice, "General Sichin, the Prince Zhongshuan's concubine has a noble status. Even if she is a prisoner like me, she should still be treated with respect. How can you treat her like a slave?" Sichin was very pleased with this title. He seriously followed Lu Heng's gaze and saw Qin Yining standing in the middle of the slaves. He could not help but disagree and said, "This is my negligence." He waved his hand and ordered Wu Yahan, "Why haven't you invited the concubine over? You are not allowed." Inari was already unhappy when she saw Lu Heng pleading for Qin Yining. When she saw Sichin agree, she angrily stopped him. It was Ben Khan who ordered her to stand there. A lowly slave should stand there. Lu Heng raised his eyebrows and looked at Inari strangely. "Is it because my Titan language is not good enough? A concubine with a different surname can only be called a lowly slave in the Titan? Then how many lowly slaves are there in the Titan royal family?" "You," Inari angrily glared at Lu Heng. "Don't forget, you are also a prisoner. If Ben Khan wants to kill you, it's just a matter of moving his mouth. You. So it's like this. Last night, General Sichin said that I was a friend of the Titan and that it was natural for friends to help each other. Today, I have become a prisoner in the Khan's mouth. Then should I go stand with the prince, Zhongshuan's concubine now?" Lu Heng came from an extraordinary background and had a noble temperament. He was more like a servant than Inari. Coupled with the displeasure on his handsome face, it made Inari even angrier. Inari angrily raised her whip and was about to lash out. Sichin reached out and grabbed the whip in time. He held Anari's hand in his and said, "Khan, please calm down." Anari looked at Si-Chin in disbelief. "You're doing this for that lowly woman again." Si-Chin's face was as cold as water. "Khan, you have to be careful of what you say. What are you trying to do with me by suspecting me like this?" Anari saw that Si-Chin was really angry. She felt wronged and angry. Moreover, there were so many servants looking at them. This made her lose face even more. She really wanted to explode. She wanted to explain what happened last night, but seeing Si-Chin's angry expression, she remembered the wet nurse's words. "Khan, you must not be so suspicious. The prince consort is not that kind of person. If Khan continues to be suspicious, it will only make a man's heart more inclined towards a gentle and affectionate woman." Gentle and affectionate? Anari couldn't help but look at the hateful Chin Ening, who was still standing among the slaves with a calm and beautiful expression. She forced herself to control her temper. Today's hunt must kill her. What cooperation? What business deal? As long as she could cooperate with the Liu family, that woman deserved to die. Seeing that Anari was silent, Si-Chin's anger subsided. He angrily reprimanded Wu Yahan. "How did you lead the way? How could you lead the mistress to the slaves' area?" Wu Yahan had been following Anari's orders and felt wronged. But she also knew that at this time, her master could only push the blame to her in order to regain face. She knelt down and kowtowed. It was this slave's negligence. "Please punish me, Prince Consort. Go and plead with the mistress. If she is unwilling to forgive you, I have nothing to say." Si-Chin's words were to Zhou's. He looked at Chin Ening. These people had been arguing for so long. Chin Ening didn't understand at all, but looking at their eyes, Chin Ening could guess that they were arguing for her. They were most likely arguing about her standing with the slaves. She didn't expect that Lu Heng would stand up for her. Although she didn't know what he said, seeing Anari's face turn green with anger made her feel much better. She was also very grateful to Lu Heng. Now that she heard Si-Chin's words, Chin Ening understood everything. She felt that Si-Chin's thoughts were funny. If she really punished Wu Yahan, not to mention how fierce Anna's revenge would be in the future, wouldn't it be better to change another maidservant? What's more, Wu Yahan was following orders. She had always taken good care of her. Chin Ening immediately waved her hand and said, "Get up. You were just following orders." She was speaking to Zhou's language, so the slaves around her didn't understand. But Wu Yahan's Zhou's language was very good. Hearing Chin Ening's words, although she was afraid that Anari would be angry, she was very grateful. She put one hand on her chest and bowed before standing up. The slaves could understand Taitan's language, but they couldn't understand what Chin Ening was saying. They understood the argument between the Khan, Prince Consort, and Lu Heng. Now that Chin Ening was so tolerant, their impression of her became better. These slaves were the former nobles of the defeated tribes. They had been enslaved by Anari for a long time. They also sympathized with Chin Ening's current situation. What's more, this was a woman who looked like a fairy. Even if she was the princess consort of the Zhou's god of war, Wang Yi, it couldn't change their impression of her. Chin Ening was invited to Lu Heng's side. Anari suppressed the anger in her heart and ordered someone to give Chin Ening a horse and a bow. She couldn't wait and shouted, "Let's go." Chapter 483. Chin Ening's horse was a tall yellow horse with a quiver on its saddle. There were 30 arrows in it, and her bow was the same half-stone bow that Anari used. Hunting was not a problem for Chin Ening. In her early years, she relied on hunting to survive in the mountains. At first, she would set traps to catch small animals and identify herbs and wild vegetables. When she was older, she would go to the market at the foot of the mountain to sell some mushrooms and herbs in exchange for some money. She knew that there were people who bought furs, so she followed some hunters and learned some hunting skills and common knowledge. Although she lived a carefree life for 3 years, she would not forget the skills she learned. However, shooting arrows while riding a horse was difficult. If she stood on the ground, it would be much easier. However, Chin Ening did not want to overdo it. Her existence had already caused Anari to fall into a vat of vinegar. If she showed her talent in hunting, Inari would probably be angered to death. She only held the bow for self-protection. Obviously, Lu Heng had the same thoughts as her. He also held the bow and reins with one hand as he followed Qin Yining. Outside of the capital, there was a vast and boundless grassland. In the October weather, the grass was yellow and there was frost on it. Occasionally, there would be patches of neat but sparse pine trees. The sky was full of clouds, forming a faint fog on the mountains in the distance. Even breathing seemed to be particularly humid. The group of people ran for half an hour and arrived at the foot of a large mountain. Most of the trees on the mountain were pine and cypress trees, unique to the cold north. Compared to the sparse trees on the way here, the trees here were particularly tall. Inari waved her hand, and everyone stopped. "We will hunt here. Let's see who has the most game." Yes, everyone, including the guards who rode their horses here, as well as the slaves who had been driven all the way here, all followed Anime into the woods and scattered into several groups, walking on tiptoe. Qin Yining and Lu Heng spontaneously walked beside Si Qin. When Inari saw that Qin Yining was shamelessly clinging onto Si Qin, he was so angry that his face turned red. He was not in a hurry to hunt his prey, so he turned around and followed beside Si Qin. Qin Yining quietly observed the surrounding terrain and did not make a move. Inari, on the other hand, was showing off his skills. Sometimes he would kill a pheasant, and sometimes he would chase after a hare. After traveling through the pine forest for a while, Inari felt bored. "We're not lucky today. We only got these. Why don't we ride outside?" Si Qin originally wanted to make Inari happy, so naturally she could say whatever she wanted. She whistled and called for everyone to leave the pine forest and return to where the slaves were guarding the horses. Everyone returned to their horses and began to search the grassland again. After going around a gentle slope, they saw a herd of wild gazelles. Inari was interested and urged her horse to charge forward. The gazelles looked up in shock and ran away when they saw the people coming. Inari liked the feeling of being chased like this. She led her men and chased after them, shouting. Who knew that when the group of people chased over a slope, the herd of gazelles that were running in front suddenly panicked and ran away in all directions. "It's a pack of wolves! Khan, it's a pack of wolves!" The men shouted loudly. Inari excitedly said, "It just so happens that Ben Khan thinks that hunting gazelles is boring. Let's catch a few wolves to play with." Inari thought for a while and suddenly had an idea. She stopped her horse and stood on a high ground to look at the fleeing gazelles. She smiled at Qin Yining and said, "Ben Khan has heard that Dezhou's Prince Zhongshuan is very brave. He is Dezhou's god of war, Wang Yi. Even Wang Fei is a heroine and a rare talent. Wang Fei must have learned a lot from Prince Zhongshuan. Go down and show us your skills." As soon as she said this, Lu Heng was shocked and his expression changed. Before Qin Yining could speak, he stood in front of her and said in a low voice, "Khan, please take back your order. Our Dezhou is different from your country's customs. Women don't pay attention to learning how to ride and shoot. Wang Fei is a lady from a noble family. How can she fight against wolves? Not to mention Wang Fei. Even the men of your country may not be able to fight against a pack of wolves. With Khan's order, it's hard to avoid suspicion of murder." Inari was trying to murder. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that. But she wanted to do it. This was Taitan land, and she was the ruler of this country. That meant that she could do whatever she wanted. If she wanted someone to live, they would live. If she wanted someone to die, they would die. Seeing Lu Heng so nervous that he jumped out to help Qin Yining, Inari was unhappy. She sneered and said, "It's you again. Surnamed Lu. What's your relationship with Prince Zhongshuan's consort? Why are you always interrupting her every time something happens?" At this point, Inari deliberately raised her voice and said in a surprised tone, Don't tell me that you two are in that kind of relationship. Surnamed Qin, you're really shameless. You dare to flirt with another man in front of everyone. Even if you don't care about your face, your husband does." Qin Yining clenched the bow in her hand tightly. Her fists and knuckles turned white. Inari had repeatedly slandered and provoked her. She really couldn't stand it anymore. Qin Yining suddenly drew 2 arrows. She took 2 steps forward and took aim. She pulled the half-stone bough into a full moon shape. At the bottom of the hill, the yellow sheep were scattered by the wolves. The wild wolves were very smart and disciplined. They only killed a few sheep when they were driving them. A very strong adult gray wolf howled a few times, and the rest of the wild wolves cooperated and tried to drive the whole flock of sheep in one direction. Cheen Ening pointed the sharp tip of the arrow at the alpha wolf. After she steadied her mind and took aim, she released an arrow with a whoosh. The wolf was very sensitive. It immediately sensed the danger and tried to dodge. However, Cheen Ening's arrow had already arrived and hit its hind leg. The alpha wolf howled and ran 2 steps with a limp. Then, it viciously looked in the direction of the arrow. When it saw Cheen Ening knocking the arrow, it immediately bared its fangs and barked a few times. However, the second arrow in Cheen Ening's hand had arrived at this time and hit the head wolf again. The ferocious male wolf fell to the ground and blood flowed on the grass. Good archery. Lu Heng and Si Qin cheered at the same time. Even the guards and slaves who came with them couldn't help but look at Cheen Ening. They didn't expect that such a delicate beauty could take down the alpha wolf with 2 arrows. Anari was so angry that her face turned red. She only wanted Cheen Ening to lose her life and feed the wolves. She wanted her to go down and fight the wolves alone, but who knew that she would be so cunning? Khan. Cheen Ening smiled and said, "The alpha wolf is injured. Khan, please let them open a gap and let the rest of the wolves leave." "Who do you think you are? What right do you have to command Ben Khan? Ben Khan must kill these wolves. Not a single one can be left alive." "You." Anari gritted her teeth and pointed at the group of slaves behind her. Then she coldly pointed at the wolves and said, "Go, capture all the wolves for Ben Khan." When Cheen Ening heard this, she was so angry that her eyebrows were raised. She rebuked, "What does Khan think his subjects are? Livestock that you can order around as you please. Look at these people. They're old and weak people, women and children. How can you be so cruel as to let them capture the wolf alive? You're sending them to their deaths." Anari was furious. She glared at Cheen Ening and waved her hand at the guards and attendants beside her. These people immediately understood and rushed into the group of slaves with horsewhips. They drove the group of people towards the wolves. A few people who refused to go obediently were killed on the spot. The screams of the slaves were filled with despair. They could only follow the orders of the guards and rush down with their eyes closed. It was as if they wanted to end this miserable and hopeless life. In the pack of wolves that had lost their leader, another wolf had taken the place of the previous one. They seemed to be anxious to avenge their leader. Seeing so many people rushing over, they were not afraid at all. They ignored the yellow goats and rushed towards the slaves while howling. The slaves were all unarmed. They had to work every day and did not have enough to eat. No matter how noble their status was in the past and how noble their treatment was, they were now all skin and bones. In addition, they had been running behind a group of horses and were running on their feet. Their physical strength had long reached its limit. Under the furious attacks of the wild wolves, people quickly fell, and the frightened yellow goats ran away while bleeding. Cheen Ening was so angry that her eyes almost popped out. "Khan, please take back your order. Does Khan not want to accumulate merit? You are harming the people like this. Are you not afraid of being punished by the heavens?" Punished by the heavens? Is the will of the heavens for Ben Khan to be able to sit in this position? How can there be any punishment from the heavens? Even if there is, Ben Khan does not care about it. Look for yourself. Did those people die unjustly? They did not die unjustly. There are so many people. If the wolves can't even deal with them, how can they serve under Ben Khan? They are lowly slaves after all. They are not worthy of serving Ben Khan. They deserve to die. Cheen Ening was so angry that she gritted her teeth and scolded. "I should have called all of you Taitan people. You are the Khan. Do you only want to enjoy life like King Zhou of Shang and not care about the lives of others?" "Shut up." Anari angrily raised her hand and whipped at Cheen Ening's face. Cheen Ening's reaction was very fast. When she saw Anari raise her hand, she already wanted to dodge. However, her health was not good recently, and she did not have enough energy. She wanted to dodge, but her body did not listen to her, and she almost fell. Seeing the whip flying towards her, Lu Heng did not care about anything else and grabbed the whip. Khan, please calm down. Lu Heng was born rich and came from the main branch of the Lu family. He had been in business for a long time and thought that he had seen all kinds of people. However, he did not expect to see such a cruel and inhumane person today. One in Inari's whip was tightly grasped by Lu Heng. She tugged at it twice, but Lu Heng had no intention of letting go. At this time, more slaves were being bitten by the wolves. Screams and cries could be heard. Inari wanted to tell Qin Yining that in her territory, disobeying her would only result in this. She even wanted Qin Yining to be eaten by the wolves. Chapter 484. Inari was so angry that he laughed. Tayton said quickly, "Young Master Lu, you wouldn't think that you have the right to be arrogant in front of Ben Khan just because you discussed some things with the Prince Consort, would you?" Lu Heng let go of the whip, but tightly protected Qin Yining behind him. He said in a deep voice, "Khan, you don't have to think too much. I just want to remind you that the people being eaten by the wolves are your Tayton people, and the people watching from the side are also your Tayton people. If you let your people see such a tyrannical side of you, aren't you afraid that they will grieve and hurt their own kind? Aren't you afraid that your benevolent reputation will be ruined, and that no one will be willing to follow you sincerely in the future?" Inari said in a deep voice, "Do you think it's your turn to teach Ben Khan how to do things? I don't dare. I don't mean to teach you. I just want to advise Khan. After all, the Prince Consort and I have reached an agreement to cooperate, so we could be considered friends. Khan and the Prince Consort are husband and wife, so we are family. If I pretend not to see the problems in my friend's family, then what kind of person am I? You're twisting words and forcing logic." Inari pointed at Qin Yining and sneered, "You obviously like this vixen and want to please her. Lu Heng, if you're really a man, then don't use this kind of method. If you like her, then you like her. If you want to sleep with her, then sleep with her. Anyway, there are so many opportunities outside. What are you afraid of? The matter between you and her is your matter. Can you not always get involved between me and her?" Lu Heng's feelings of not getting what he wanted were poked, and he was said to be so unbearable. He was so angry that his face turned red. He said in a deep voice, "If Khan doesn't want to listen to my advice, then I have nothing to say. But Khan has done so many unrighteous things. Don't regret it in the future. Who do you think you are? Do you think that Ben Khan will listen to you?" Inari kept talking in a language that Qin Yining couldn't understand. When he argued with Lu Heng, he also spoke in Tayton. Qin Yining didn't know what they were arguing about. He was really depressed and aggrieved, especially when a group of slaves were being slaughtered by wild wolves not far from the foot of the hill. The stench of blood was so thick that it couldn't disperse, and the screams were so sharp that they cut a few holes in people's hearts. This kind of hell on earth was caused by a single sentence from Inari, but Inari did not have the slightest awareness of this, as if it was a matter of course. What's the use of these people who monopolize power and don't think about the people? What's the difference between Inari and a Dayan ruler? Qin Yining circled around the two people who were arguing. Once again, he knocked an arrow on his bow and aimed at the wild wolf in the middle of the battle. At first, she was able to aim accurately because there were no humans around the wolf. But now, the wolf was killing in the crowd. Qin Yining's arrow tip turned sharply, and it was very easy for her to accidentally injure her own kind. This made her fearful and fearful. Seeing that she kept aiming but didn't shoot an arrow, Si Qin finally opened his mouth. "You want to kill the wolf again? Are you sure that you won't hurt the people around you?" Qin Yining looked back at Si Qin and sneered. At this time, shouldn't the Prince Consort think of a way to persuade the Khan to let those slaves go? Si Qin clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Do you know that these people are all criminals who have been convicted of treason? If their deaths can bring joy to the Khan, then it's a worthy death." Qin Yining's bow was fully drawn, but she couldn't aim at the prey. She couldn't rashly release the bowstring in case she hurt her arm. Just as she was feeling melancholy, she heard Si Qin's words. She was so angry that her long, shapely eyebrows rose. She turned around and aimed the sharp tip of the arrow directly at Si-Chin's nose. Si-Chin looked at Qin Yining without moving an inch. Inari and Lu Heng were both frightened by Qin Yining's actions. They even forgot about their quarrel. The surrounding guards drew their swords and sabers. They surrounded Qin Yining one by one, as if they would only stop when they cut her into 1,000 pieces. Si-Chin didn't show any fear. His eyes were even brighter, and there was even an unconcealable smile on his lips. "What do you want to do?" Qin Yining pursed her lips. A gust of wind blew, bringing along a fishy smell. It also blew the hair on her temples and the red agate fringe on her forehead. "Give the order to save people and kill the wolf. Otherwise, I will kill you." "I give the order? Khan's decree is for them to die. What order can I give? Isn't there a saying in Dezhou that goes, if the monarch wants his subjects to die, they have no choice but to die? You are the Titan god of war. You control a large number of troops and have such high prestige in the army. Do you think these people won't listen to you? You just don't care about their lives. My husband is a soldier who leads troops to war. He is as famous as you. I know that his hands are stained with a lot of blood, and he has killed countless people. But I know in my heart that he is a good person who can subdue demons and has a compassionate heart. But what about you? Your compassionate heart has been eaten by dogs, hasn't it? Such an unprincipled person. How can you be as famous as my husband? I feel ashamed for you." "Shut up." Qin Yining's words pierced through people's hearts. Si-Chin listened with a gloomy expression, while Inari was seething with anger. "Guards, take her down for Ben Khan." When the guards heard this, they rushed forward like a swarm of bees. Lu Heng anxiously stomped his feet and stepped forward to protect Qin Yining. He pulled her back and said, "How can you be so impulsive? Quickly move the arrow away." Qin Yining looked back at the few remaining slaves at the bottom of the hill. She gritted her teeth and showed no signs of compromising. The guard stepped forward and grabbed Qin Yining's hand that was holding onto the arrow's tail, forcing her to release the arrow in a direction where there was no one around. When the bowstring was released, Qin Yining's hands were immediately pinned behind her back. Inari said in a low voice, "This person intends to assassinate the prince consort. Her intentions should be punished. Immediately take her away and behead her." "Yes." The guards pulled Qin Yining to the side. Unexpectedly, Si-Chin, who had been silent all this time, coughed and casually waved her hand. When the guards saw this, they immediately forgot about Inari's orders and let go of Qin Yining's hands. When Qin Yining saw this, she immediately understood that in Titan, Si-Chin really meant what she said. Inari shouted, "Why did you let go of this evil vixen? Ever since she came, we have not been able to live in peace. If we get rid of her today, we can get rid of a scourge." At this moment, a sound similar to a dog's barking came from the bottom of the hill. Qin Yining turned around and saw a ground full of badly mutilated corpses, and the grass dyed red with blood. The guard were driving the wild wolves away. She closed her eyes. Ever since she was forced to follow Inari, she had to endure all these frustrations and frustrations. Every word she said to her was torture. Si-Chin gestured again. Immediately, the guard stepped forward and brought Qin Yining and Lu Heng to the side. Chapter 485. Inari was flabbergasted as she looked up at Si-Chin, whose face was as calm as still water. She asked in disbelief, "What do you mean, Khan?" Si-Chin squeezed out these two words from between his teeth. He grabbed Inari's wrist and pulled her in front of him. He lowered his head and stared at her until their noses were almost touching. "Have you had enough?" The tassels on Inari's hat were jingling, and her wrist was hurting from Si-Chin's grip. However, she had no time to think about it. All her thoughts were frozen by Si-Chin's unprecedentedly serious expression. "Prince Consort, I am Khan. I have my own rules for everything I do. How dare you say that I am causing trouble?" Si-Chin gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "You are the ruler of a country. Your subjects are watching your every word and action. You're acting like a shrew and don't know how to control your emotions in front of others. Do you still care about your face? Do you still care about your face when you act like this? Do you still want me to put my face? That's enough. What do you mean by your face? You only care about that vixen and don't care about my feelings at all. Why do you think I'm targeting her in front of everyone? If you were truly devoted to me and didn't make me feel the slightest bit of jealousy or sadness, then why would I act like this? Inari didn't care about her face. Sichin deliberately lowered his voice so as not to attract the attention of others. However, Inari only cared about making a ruckus. She felt wronged and was suppressing her anger. However, she didn't feel that she was doing anything wrong. Her sharp voice traveled far and wide and attracted everyone's attention. It was as if she wouldn't stop until everyone knew what she was doing. Although Qin Yining didn't understand what they were saying, he couldn't help but frown in disgust when he saw Inari acting like a lunatic. Inari happened to turn her head and met Qin Yining's gaze. Her face burned as if she had been slapped a few times. She was already the Khan and the most respected woman in the Taytan. However, her husband not only used violence against her, but also for another woman. Inari was embarrassed and angry. She struggled to break free from the restraint on her arm and raised her hand to give Sichin a hard slap. Pa! With a crisp sound, Sichin was slapped to the side. His face was as calm as an ancient well, but all the guards and soldiers around him quieted down in an instant and stared in silence. Inari was actually regretful after the slap. Sichin was a heroic man, unlike those despicable people who fawned over her for the sake of power and benefits. When they first got married, it was also Anna who took the initiative. Sichin wasn't willing to be the prince consort from the start. After all, any talented and ambitious man would not want to be called a woman who had to be treated with respect. If he became the Khan's son-in-law, he would only be Inari's accessory. Even if he fought for everything with his own efforts, people would say that he achieved it by stepping on a woman's shoulders. Inari knew that Sichin had been questioned a lot. In fact, she had been holding back her anger. Because she knew this, she was worried about her gains and losses. That was why she kept a close eye on him and did not let him have the chance to escape. But what did she do now? She slapped this proud man in front of everyone. Inari was very anxious. She anxiously grabbed Sichin's hand and said, "I didn't do it on purpose. I was just in a moment of desperation." Before she could finish her words, Sichin pushed her hand away. Sichin turned and walked away. He raised his voice and ordered everyone, "Go back." With just these two words, the accompanying guards greeted him solemnly. Qin Yining and Lu Heng looked at each other. They could see the deep meaning in each other's eyes. It seemed that they had guessed correctly. In Taytan, Sichin's prestige in the military was equivalent to Pang Shao and Ji Ziyu's Tiger Army and Dragon Army in Dezhou. How could such a man be willing to submit to a woman's skirt? Now, it seemed that Inari's bodyguards all respected and submitted to Sichin. Inari was actually used to this situation. This meant that Sichin had already grasped most of the power in Taytan. He even made people admire him and submit to him. As for Inari, Sichin was even more successful. No matter how powerful Inari was outside, as long as Sichin was involved, she would immediately become a willful little girl. Whatever she wanted or was afraid of, she would unreservedly show Sichin. This made it easy for Sichin to control her. For a woman who was addicted to love, this was nothing. However, for a woman who held power, this situation was too dangerous. Qin Yining and Lu Heng followed the guards and found their horses. Inari also pursed her lips and followed with a cold face. On the way back, Lu Heng followed closely beside Qin Yining. He urged his horse closer and whispered, "The situation is dangerous. You have to be more careful from now on. You have to be careful with the food you eat. You also have to be on guard against the people around you. I see that the two of them are in a deadlock. If things go wrong, the Khan will take his anger out on you." Qin Yining nodded and whispered, "You have to be careful too. I'm fine. I can still work with them, but you're different." At this point, Lu Heng sighed and said, "You also suffered an unexpected calamity." Qin Yining shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "Things have already come to this. There is no point in thinking too much. We can only look forward." Lu Heng nodded and stared at her for a moment. He then looked away and muttered, It is your personality that is precious. What? Qin Yining couldn't hear Lu Hang's mutterings clearly due to the sound of galloping horses. She could only vaguely hear what he was saying. Lu Hang suddenly came back to his senses and shook his head. Nothing. Qin Yining saw this and did not ask any more questions. They went out to hunt, but did not catch any prey. The slaves they brought were all fed to the wolves. If Inari had not been so angry that he was about to go crazy, Qin Yining would have mocked Wenwen. Did she go out to hunt or to feed the wolves? The group of people rushed through the city gates. As they were on their way to the palace, they saw two youths appear in the middle of the road again. Everyone hurriedly reined in their horses. Qin Yining looked over. This time, it was broad daylight, and he could finally see the two youths clearly. The two youths were born with good facial features. They had thick eyebrows and big eyes. Their clothes were shabby. Although it was cold, they were barefooted like the slaves just now. The two of them knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully. They put their foreheads on the ground and said sincerely, "Khan, please let us Abu and enrich out." Inari was originally sulking. She did not expect these two people who did not know what was good for them to come out and block the road. She could not control her temper. She raised her hand and whipped the bigger youth. "Get out of my way." The young man cried out in pain, but he did not dodge. "I beg Khan to let go of me, Abu and Ag. We, Minuo, have long submitted to you. We are your subjects. Why won't you let us go?" Chapter 486. Dead. The youth blinked his eyes in disbelief and shook his head. "No way. My Abu and Erji are both very healthy. They can't be dead. Ben Khan, please be merciful and let them go." Inari sneered. "A bunch of defeated trash. They're all dead. They were useless. They followed Ben Khan to hunt, but they were bitten to death by wolves. Ben Khan had nothing to say to such people. Get out of the way, or I'll throw you to the wolves to accompany your Abu and Erji." Bitten to death by wolves? The two youths' faces were pale, and their eyes were dull. They were scared silly. The older one stared blankly at Inari, while the younger one stretched his neck to look at the group. He was clearly trying to find someone, hoping that Inari was joking. More and more Taytan people gathered around to watch. They didn't know what was going on. Qin Yining had already understood from Lu Heng's explanation. Looking at the two youths who had lost their parents, Qin Yining felt very sad. Inari was too cruel. In fact, those slaves didn't have to die. Qin Yining wasn't a soft-hearted person. She also understood that all success was built on sacrifices. For example, the establishment of the Dezhou dynasty was built on the bones of many people. If the country was really faced with the destruction of the country and the displacement of the people, there had to be a war. If those slaves were sent to the battlefield, even if they died on the battlefield, it was still admirable. Qin Yining didn't dislike such a heroic way of dying. But today, these slaves didn't die honorably. They simply became Inari's toys. The meaning of their deaths was just to let Inari have some fun for a while. What kind of ruler was this? Inari's absurdity was even worse than the big-eyed, fatuous ruler. Just as Qin Yining was cursing in her heart, Si-Chin waved her hand to block Anatri's whip that was about to continue lashing out. She sighed and said, "Your Abu and Ag are indeed dead. After all, the Minuo tribe still has people waiting for you to lead them." The two brothers stared blankly at Si-Chin's compassionate eyes. For a moment, they were overcome with grief, and tears rolled down their cheeks. Inari was annoyed and couldn't bear to see the two of them cry. Just as he was about to throw a tantrum, Si-Chin grabbed his wrist tightly. The two had just started arguing, but Si-Chin did not loosen his grip. He looked like he was going to break Inari's hand, which made Inari even angrier. But she didn't want to lose Si-Chin. She had to be patient. She could not continue to embarrass Si-Chin in front of others. Inari allowed Si-Chin to grab his wrist and didn't try to punish the two youths. When she thought about how the remaining 4,000 people of the Minuo tribe were all old, weak, sick, and disabled, and had no backbone, and that the entire tribe would have to rely on her as slaves, Inari wasn't in a hurry to kill them. Wouldn't it be better to let them be slaves with her? Inari no longer had any intention to kill them and ordered the people to continue on their journey. The entire group moved forward in a straight line. When they met the two youths, they simply split into two lines and went around them. When Qin Yining passed by the two youths, he saw the tears on their faces and the despair in their eyes. He couldn't help but feel sad. However, his situation wasn't much better than theirs. Qin Yining couldn't help him, and she couldn't even protect herself. What she should be worried about now was her life after returning to the palace. With Inari's enmity towards her, Qin Yining believed that if she wasn't careful, she could lose her life. When he returned to the room where she was locked up, Qin Yining found that the guards and maids guarding him had all changed. Inari was really careful. She was a weak woman who didn't know any martial arts and couldn't speak Taitan. How could she escape? Inari didn't even give her a chance to bribe the people around her. However, Qin Yining didn't care at first. He just ate more carefully and used more cautiously when he went out. Qin Yining didn't know what Inari and Qin talked about after returning to the palace. When he saw them on the third day, they had already reconciled and seemed to be even closer than before. What surprised Qin Yining the most was not the reconciliation between Inari and Qin, but the old friend in front of him, Fairy Lu, also known as Tianjizi. At this moment, she was wearing a dark blue Taoist robe and was sitting on a mahogany chair opposite him with a smile. Tianjizi hadn't changed in a long time. Her face was rosy and full of energy, and she seemed to be living a good life. The person standing behind her was also someone familiar. It was Mu Jinghu, who had once protected and saved her. When Qin Yining saw Tianjizi, he became alert. However, when he saw Mu Jinghu, he knew that although Mu Jinghu was Tianjizi's martial nephew in name, he was actually Tianjizi's disciple. The relationship between the master and disciple was naturally not ordinary. However, Qin Yining still had some hope of escaping. If Mu Jinghu was willing to help, she could go back. It had been so long, and Qin Yining was really worried about his family. Tianjizi spoke naturally in front of Inari and Qin. She didn't hesitate to speak to Qin Yining and said, "Miss Family Qin, we meet again. My divination that day was not wrong. You really are a Red Lawn star, right?" Qin Yining blushed at her words. If he was thin-skinned, he wouldn't even know how to respond. "Long time no see. Fairy Lu is still so energetic. I didn't expect to see you here." "Hi, I'm used to being carefree. Naturally, I'll go wherever it's easy to live." Tianjizi smiled and said, "With the Khan and Prince Consort's care, I'm living much more comfortably in Taitan than in Dian. How is it? How do you feel now that you're a princess?" "Feel?" Qin Yining almost retorted. She was a prisoner. Did he have to tell her about his psychological journey after he was forced to leave Pangshao? Tianjizi smiled and said, "Forget it. If you don't want to talk about it, then don't. But you don't have to worry. Your luck is still very good. I think it's because of your husband. You haven't used up all your good luck yet. You should rest well. Looking at you, you're much weaker than you were before you were married." No matter what the other party's motive was, at least this sentence showed genuine concern. They could be considered to have met an old friend in a foreign land, right? The first time she met Tianjizi, it was her grandmother who took her there. Qin Yining thought of her grandmother's family in the far south. She didn't know how their children were doing. Qin Yining really wanted to go back to the Zhou, but there was nothing she could do. Inari saw that Qin Yining and Tianjizi were chatting happily and couldn't help but feel jealous. It seems like Tianjizi is very familiar with her. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.